Nearly 5,000 years ago, a civilization fully organized and advanced was already constructing large temples, planned cities, and extensive ceremonial centers on the dry coast of Peru before the first Egyptian pyramid was built, the Caral civilization. While ancient Egypt was still forming, Caral had already reached a high level of organization in astronomy, agriculture, and social structure. How did they manage to build such megalithic structures? What technology did they use? Before we dive into this journey, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you now. We're always eager to learn where our viewers are tuning in from. For a very long time, people believed that the earliest civilizations on Earth began in only a few famous places. They thought about ancient Egypt with its tall pyramids, Mesopotamia with its mighty rivers, China with its early dynasties, and the Indus Valley with its well-planned cities. These were seen as the first great centers of human life, places where people learned to build, farm, trade, and organize themselves into large communities. But in the dry valleys of modern-day Peru, beneath layers of sand, rock, and forgotten history, something completely unexpected lay hidden for thousands of years. That place was Caral, and the story of how Caral was found, understood, and brought into the spotlight is one of the most mysterious and surprising discoveries in the entire world. The journey of Caral's discovery began with a landscape that looked dead, empty, and silent for as far as the eye could see. The Soup Valley, where Caral is located, sits in a region of Peru that seems too dry and barren to support life. When you first look at it, there is nothing that suggests an ancient city once stood there. The desert wind blows across endless stretches of pale sand. The sun blazes overhead with almost no clouds to block its light. Vegetation grows only in thin patches along the river, and birds fly silently over the ground searching for insects or scraps of food. To anyone passing through a few decades ago, this area looked like a lifeless wasteland with nothing to study or explore. But deep beneath that surface, an astonishing secret slept quietly. Stone platforms, staircases, ruins of old homes, ceremonial spaces and pyramids shaped like giant steps, all waited for someone to notice them once again. These structures had been built by people thousands of years before the first Egyptian pyramid even existed. Yet nobody knew they were there. Time and nature had erased the clues so well that the entire civilization of Caral went missing from human memory. Caral remained untouched for many centuries because few people suspected that such an ancient civilization could have existed in that part of the world. Most archaeologists believe that South America's large societies began much later, long after civilizations had already risen and fallen in other regions. But Caral changed everything. It revealed that the people of the Andes were building complex societies at almost the same time as the earliest civilizations anywhere on Earth. And even more surprising, they achieved this without using writing, metal tools, or weapons of war. The mysterious rediscovery of Caral truly began in the late 20th century, when archaeologists started re-examining old survey maps that showed strange mound-shaped formations scattered across the Super Valley. These mounds looked like natural hills at first, but their shapes were too geometric, too straight, and too organized to be accidents of nature. One of the archaeologists who noticed this was a Peruvian researcher named Ruth Shady. She had spent many years studying ancient Andean cultures, and she believed that these mounds deserved closer examination. Many others ignored them, thinking they were simply piles of stones, but she wondered whether they might be something more. When Shady and her team visited the site around the final years of the 20th century, they began uncovering clues that changed the entire picture. Beneath the sand, they found stones shaped by human hands. They discovered walls arranged in straight lines. They noticed staircases and platforms that suggested large public buildings. They found open circular spaces that looked like gathering areas or ceremonial plazas. Each new discovery made it clear that this was no ordinary settlement. It was something huge. But the most shocking revelation came when they began dating the materials found at Caral. By analysing plant fibres, charcoal remnants, and other organic material, scientists determined that Caral was incredibly old. It did not belong to a period a few thousand years ago. It stretched back all the way to around 5,000 years in the past. To put that into simpler words, Caral existed around the same time as the early cities of ancient Mesopotamia, and long before the Egyptians finished building their first pyramid. This meant that Caral was one of the oldest known civilizations in all of the Americas and one of the earliest civilizations anywhere on the planet. The moment this discovery was confirmed, the world of archaeology was shaken. A forgotten society that had lived and thrived thousands of years ago had suddenly re-emerged from the shadows. This society had built huge structures, organized complex communities, and shared a sophisticated culture long before anyone expected such development in the Americas. Caral became known as the Mother City of the Andes, the beginning of a long chain of civilizations that eventually included the Inca Empire. But what made this discovery even more mysterious was the nature of Caral itself. When researchers carefully studied the ruins, they noticed something strange. There was no sign of warfare. No weapons were found. No defensive walls surrounded the city. There were no burned buildings, no arrowheads scattered across the ground, and no fortifications suggesting fear of attackers. Instead, the city appeared peaceful, designed more for ceremony, trade, and cooperation than for battle. This alone made Caral different from many other early civilizations, which often rose to power through conflict or competition. Caral's architecture also spoke volumes about the people who lived there. The city contained several large pyramids made of stone and earth, arranged carefully around open plazas. These pyramids had wide staircases leading up to flat tops where ceremonies or gatherings may have taken place. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which were built mainly as tombs for pharaohs, Caral's pyramids seemed to serve social, cultural, or spiritual purposes connected to the entire community. One of the most impressive structures at Caral is known today as the Great Pyramid. It rises more than 20 meters in height and covers a massive area at its base. Standing before it today, even in its ruined state, you can still sense the complexity involved in constructing it. Thousands of stones had to be moved, shaped, and arranged with careful planning. The work required collaboration, leadership, and a deep understanding of engineering, even though the people who built it had no written language to record their designs. Another fascinating feature of Caral is its circular sunken plazas. These circular spaces were built by digging deep into the ground and shaping the walls with stones. They appear to have been used for gatherings, rituals, or important communal events. When archaeologists uncovered them, they were astonished by how perfectly round and symmetrical they were. It showed that the builders of Caral had strong mathematical skills, the ability to measure and plan precisely, and a shared vision of how their city should look. The more archaeologists explored Caral, the more mysteries they uncovered. For example, they found ancient musical instruments, including flutes made from condor bones and horns crafted from deer. These instruments were not simple tools. They were finely made, showing that music played an important role in the daily life and ceremonies of the Caral people. Science suggests that weaving and clothing design were well-developed industries in the city. One of the biggest mysteries, however, is how Caral supported such a large population in such a dry and unforgiving environment. The Soup Valley receives very little rainfall, and yet Caral flourished for many centuries. Archaeologists believe that the people of Caral relied heavily on the fertile land near the Soup River, which allowed them to grow crops such as cotton, beans, squash, and guava. Cotton, in particular, became extremely important because it allowed them to produce fishing nets. These nets were traded with coastal communities in exchange for fish and other resources. This system created a strong economic network that stretched across many settlements. This trading network is one reason we know that Caral was not an isolated city. It communicated with other communities and likely played a major role in regional trade. This also explains why Caral grew to such an enormous size. It was not just a village, it was the centre of a civilization, a capital city in a sense, connected to many smaller settlements across the region. Yet another remarkable aspect of Caral is the way its people adapted to the natural environment. Evidence suggests that they understood weather patterns, seasonal changes, and possibly even early forms of astronomy. The layout of the city may have been aligned with certain celestial events, such as the movement of the sun or moon, although researchers are still studying this idea. What is clear is that the people of Caral paid close attention to nature and incorporated that knowledge into their daily lives. Archaeologists also found quipus at Caral. A quipu is a system of knotted strings used for recording information. Later civilizations in the Andes, such as the Inca, used quipus to keep track of numbers, taxes, and events. The presence of quippus in Caral suggests that some form of record-keeping existed much earlier than previously thought. The exact purpose of the Caral quippus is still unknown, but their existence is another clue to the complexity of this ancient society. As researchers dug deeper, they also uncovered burial sites, though Caral's burial practices were not as elaborate as those found in Egypt or other regions. The bodies discovered were usually simple and not surrounded by treasures or grand tombs. This suggests that Caral's society may have been more equal, with fewer social divisions between rich and poor. Or perhaps their values were different, focusing more on communal life rather than individual glory. One of the most puzzling mysteries involves Caral's disappearance. The city thrived for many centuries, yet eventually it was abandoned. The people who built the pyramids, who played flutes in the sandy desert, who traded cotton for fish, and who gathered in circular plazas all vanished. But why? Scientists believe that environmental changes may have played a major role. The region is known for earthquakes. Some evidence suggests that earthquakes damaged Caral's buildings and made life there more difficult. Other signs point to shifts in climate that may have affected farming and access to water. If the river that supported their crops began changing its course or became less reliable, the people may have had no choice but to move elsewhere. What makes the mystery deeper is that Caral left almost no signs of conflict. If enemies had invaded, there would be traces of destruction, weapons or burned structures, but none were found. Instead, the city simply seems to have been abandoned. Over time, the sands covered its once grand plazas, its pyramids became rounded hills, and its memory faded from human knowledge. For thousands of years, Caral slept beneath the desert. Only the wind moved across it. Only the sun warmed its hidden stones, and only a few wild animals wandered across the plazas that once held crowds of people. The voices, steps, laughter, ceremonies, and music of Caral's inhabitants became silent. Generations of humans lived and died without knowing that one of the world's earliest civilizations lay beneath their feet. But this silence was broken when modern archaeologists uncovered its ruins. As the news spread, Caral became recognized as a site of global importance. It proved that the story of human civilization was far more widespread and complex than anyone expected. It revealed that advanced societies arose independently in different regions of the world, not only in the famous areas most people know. The discovery of Caral also opened new questions about human development. It made researchers wonder what other ancient cities might still lie hidden beneath desert sands, jungle floors, or mountain valleys. If Caral could be forgotten for so long, perhaps other early civilizations are waiting to be found. As scientists studied Caral further, they found even more surprising details about the people who lived there. One of the most interesting findings was evidence of large-scale construction using shikra bags. These were bags woven from plant fibers, filled with stones, and used to stabilize the walls of pyramids and other structures. This technique showed an advanced understanding of architecture and engineering. It allowed the Caral people to build massive structures that were sturdy enough to survive heavy winds and earthquakes. Archaeologists also discovered carvings, irrigation features, and traces of ancient household objects. Each object painted a clearer picture of life in the ancient city. People cooked food in clay ovens, stored water in large containers, and lived in houses built with stone foundations and walls made from reeds and mud. Their daily lives may have been simple in some ways, but they also had beautiful objects, musical instruments, and ceremonial spaces that added richness to their culture. Another deep mystery involves the purpose of Caral's pyramids. While we know they were not used as tombs, their exact functions remain unclear. Some scholars believe they were used for rituals connected to the seasons, the harvest, or the movement of celestial bodies. Others think they might have been places where leaders addressed the community or made important decisions. Whatever their purpose, they were central to the city's identity and life. One of the most astonishing details about Caral's discovery is how much of the city remains unexcavated even today. Beneath the desert, many structures still lie buried. Archaeologists have only uncovered a portion of the ancient city. This means that future generations may reveal even more secrets, perhaps clues about what the people of Caral believed, how they organized their society, or why they eventually left. One of the most striking things about Caral is the presence of 6 enormous pyramid-shaped structures. These pyramids are not like those found in Egypt. They were built differently, and they served different purposes, but they stand as clear proof of a highly organized and deeply thoughtful society that planned, designed, and built monumental structures on a scale that was once considered impossible for people living in the Americas at such an early date. One of the most striking things about Caral is the presence of 6 enormous pyramid-shaped structures. These pyramids are not like those found in Egypt. They were built differently, and they served different purposes, but they stand as clear proof of a highly organized and deeply thoughtful society that planned, designed, and built monumental structures on a scale that was once considered impossible for people living in the Americas at such an early date. Stumbled on Caral in the middle of the 20th century, they did not know what they were looking at. The site looked like a group of dusty hills and broken stone structures. It was only in the late 1990s, when the Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady and her team began studying the area in detail, that the true age of Caral became clear. Radiocarbon dating revealed that Caral was far older than they ever expected. In fact, it was one of the earliest major civilizations in the world. This discovery forced experts to rethink the timeline of human development in the Americas. Caral was not just an early settlement. It was a fully developed city with neighborhoods, public spaces, ceremonial complexes, and most importantly, the 6 pyramids that defined its spiritual and social identity. These pyramids were not built for burial, as in Egypt. Instead, they served as ceremonial platforms and sacred gathering places for large groups of people. They were the center of religious life, and likely the center of political life as well. Each of the 6 pyramids has its own design, size, and purpose. They were carefully planned and made of stone and earth, with staircases rising to the top where rituals and gatherings took place. The pyramids were often built in stages, meaning that they were enlarged and improved over time as the city grew. This tells archaeologists that the builders of Caral were not only skilled planners, but also had a long-term vision for their city. They understood how to expand and how to preserve their structures for future generations. The Great Pyramid of Caral is the largest and most famous of the 6 pyramids. It stands over 20 meters tall, and its base covers an area almost the size of several modern city blocks. Climbing its central staircase thousands of years ago would have been a powerful experience. From the top, the entire city and much of the surrounding valley would have been visible. Leaders, priests, and community members probably gathered there during important ceremonies, perhaps related to agriculture, astronomy, or seasonal changes. Caral's civilization depended heavily on farming, especially cotton cultivation, so ceremonies may have centered around ensuring successful harvests. The Great Pyramid is only one of the 6 structures. Nearby stands the Pyramid Maya, which is slightly smaller but equally impressive. Another pyramid, known simply as the Amphitheatre Pyramid, stands next to a large circular plaza where hundreds of people could gather. This circular plaza is one of the most interesting features of Caral. It suggests that the city was built for large public events, not for war or defense. Caral has no signs of battlements, weapons, or fortifications. Instead, everything points towards ceremonial life, trade, and social gathering. People may have danced, played instruments, or conducted important religious ceremonies here. Archaeologists discovered a group of musical instruments at Caral, including flutes made from the bones of condors and pelicans. This suggests that music played a key role in the city's ceremonies, and the pyramids served as sacred backdrops to these events. The people who built the pyramids of Caral were part of a culture known today as the Norte Chico civilization. They lived along the northern coast of Peru and developed cities long before many other parts of the world did. Instead of writing systems, they used a method called quipus, which involved tying knots on cords to record information. This system was also used by the later Inca civilization, showing a long tradition of knowledge being passed down through generations. The builders of Caral were highly skilled engineers. The pyramids were not simple piles of stone. They were built with layers of river stones placed in special woven plant bags called shikras. These shikras provided stability, absorbed vibrations, and helped protect the structures during earthquakes. This is important because Peru is a highly seismic region, and the people of Caral clearly understood how to build safely in such an environment. The use of shikras may be one of the earliest examples of earthquake-resistant construction in the world. Archaeologists also discovered that many of the pyramids were aligned with celestial events. The people of Caral studied the sky carefully. They watched the movement of the sun, the moon, and certain stars. Their knowledge allowed them to create calendars and predict seasonal changes. These observations likely influenced the construction and placement of the pyramids. Certain ceremonies probably happened on specific days when the sun or moon lined up with parts of the structures. Such alignments would have reinforced the spiritual importance of the pyramids and strengthened the community's connection to the natural world. It is clear that the 6 pyramids of Caral were not just buildings, they were the centerpieces of a sophisticated system of ideas, beliefs, and shared traditions. They shaped the daily lives of everyone who lived there. People worked together to maintain the city, produce food, weave textiles, create tools, and trade with nearby settlements. Caral was part of a broader network of communities connected by trade routes, stretching across valleys and coastal areas. Caral thrived on a specialized economy. Unlike some ancient civilizations that depended heavily on hunting or animal domestication, Caral was built on agriculture and trade. Farmers grew cotton, beans, squash, and other crops. Cotton was especially important because it allowed people to create fishing nets, clothing, and textiles. These cotton goods were traded with coastal communities in exchange for seafood and other valuable resources. This trade supported the entire valley and allowed Caral to flourish. The social structure of Caral was likely complex. Archaeologists believe that priests, astronomers, and political leaders lived in or near the pyramids. These individuals probably made important decisions, organized ceremonies, and oversaw construction projects. They may have been responsible for interpreting natural events like floods, droughts, or astronomical patterns. Farmers, craftspeople, traders, and laborers formed the rest of the society. All of them played important roles in maintaining the city and supporting the pyramid constructions. The city of Caral was built with careful urban planning. The 6 pyramids were not placed randomly. They were arranged with purpose, forming a layout that reflected the values of the society. Pathways connected the pyramids to smaller residential areas. Water channels, plazas, and open spaces showed a strong sense of design. This level of planning proves that Caral was not an accidental settlement, but a well-organized city built with long-term vision. The pyramids also reveal that Caral was a peaceful society. There are no signs of war, invasion, or violence. No weapons, no defensive walls, and no burned settlements have been found. Instead, everything in Caral appears to be tied to ceremonial and social activities. This suggests that the culture valued harmony, cooperation, and shared spiritual life. The pyramids may have served as symbols of unity, bringing people together through ceremonies and communal work. Despite its achievements, Caral eventually declined. The reasons are still debated. Some experts believe that changes in the climate affected water sources or farming areas. Others think that shifts in trade patterns weakened the economy. Whatever the reason, the society that built the 6 pyramids gradually faded, leaving behind their monumental structures buried under sand and stone. For thousands of years, the pyramids remained unseen, their significance forgotten. When archaeologists uncovered the pyramids in the 20th century, they were astonished by the scale and age of the site. Caral did not fit any existing timeline. It forced historians to rethink the development of civilization in the Americas. Before Caral was studied, many assumed that complex societies in the Americas developed much later than those in the Middle East, Africa, or Asia. But Caral proved that people in the Americas were creating complex cities at the same time as some of the earliest civilizations in the world. The 6 pyramids stand as undeniable evidence that the people of Caral were pioneers of urban development, architecture, engineering, and astronomy. They lived in a world where the landscape was harsh and the climate unpredictable, yet they managed to design a sustainable society that lasted for many centuries. Their achievements challenge old assumptions and highlight the intelligence and creativity of early American civilizations. In more recent years, Caral has become a protected archaeological site. Researchers from around the world come to study its pyramids, plazas, and artifacts. Each discovery adds new pieces to the story of this ancient society. The 6 pyramids remain at the center of research because they hold the keys to understanding how the people of Caral lived, worshipped, and organized their world. The Great Pyramid continues to attract attention because of its size and layout. Its internal rooms, staircases, and elevated platform reveal how important rituals were carried out. The Amphitheatre Pyramid draws interest for its connection to the circular plaza, where collective ceremonies likely took place. The remaining pyramids, though smaller, provide insight into the daily and seasonal activities that shaped life in the city. Some pyramids show signs of fire pits or offering rooms, suggesting that people performed rituals involving food, plant materials, or objects made from shells and stones. These offerings may have been connected to agricultural cycles or requests for favourable weather. Others contain remnants of rooms where leaders may have gathered to make decisions or record information using quipus. Caral's pyramids are also connected to its unique architecture. Instead of using large cut stones like the Egyptians or Mayans, the people of Caral relied on smaller river stones wrapped in woven bags. These bags were stacked and arranged to create stable walls and terraces. Over time, additional layers were added as the pyramids grew. This method allowed the builders to raise large structures quickly while ensuring strength and flexibility. The pyramids were typically built with several levels, each representing a new stage of construction. Some levels contain remains of rooms, corridors, storage areas, and ceremonial spaces. The staircases were positioned to face specific directions, possibly aligned with sunrise or sunset during important dates in the year. These alignments show that astronomy played an essential role in shaping the architecture of the city. Another important discovery at Caral involves the use of fire altars on several pyramid platforms. In these altars, archaeologists found ash, plant remains, and traces of burned offerings. This evidence suggests that the pyramids were used for rituals involving fire, light, and perhaps communication with the spiritual world. The people of Caral likely believed that the gods or cosmic forces listened to them through these rituals. Some pyramids contain open courtyards and large rooms that might have been used by priests or administrators. These spaces could have been where quipus was stored or where decisions about agriculture and trade were made. The fact that these rooms are part of the pyramids highlights the connection between religion and government. In Caral, spiritual authority and political authority were closely linked. Archaeologists also discovered that the pyramids were built in harmony with the natural environment. The people of Caral studied the landscape carefully, choosing locations that provided stable ground and easy access to resources. They understood how to manage water, which was crucial for their survival. Although the Soup Valley is dry, seasonal rivers provided enough water for farming when used carefully. The pyramids were placed in areas that would not flood, ensuring long-term stability. The layout of the city suggests a deep respect for order and balance. Houses and smaller buildings were arranged around the pyramids, creating distinct zones for living, working, and gathering. Some neighborhoods contained workshops where artisans made tools, textiles, and goods for trade. Others contained remains of kitchens and storage areas. This level of organization required planning, leadership, and shared purpose. The people of Caral had no form of writing to describe their lives, but their buildings, artifacts, and city layout speak for them. The pyramids reveal that they were a society that valued community, ceremony, and knowledge. They invested enormous time and energy into constructing structures that brought people together and connected them to their beliefs. Their pyramids still stand today as a lasting reminder of their achievements. As more archaeological work continues in Caral, researchers continue to uncover new insights. In recent years, advanced technologies like satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and laser scanning have helped experts create detailed maps of the pyramids and surrounding areas. These modern tools reveal hidden layers of construction and provide a clearer picture of how the city evolved over time. Caral may have grown gradually, with each new generation adding to the pyramids and improving the city's layout. This long-term development suggests stability and cooperation within the society. People did not abandon their buildings or move frequently. Instead, they invested in the same locations for centuries, constantly improving and expanding them. The 6 pyramids of Caral are not only architectural achievements, but also cultural symbols. They represent unity, shared identity, and collective effort. In a time long before writing, massive stone monuments served as physical reminders of a community's values and beliefs. Caral's pyramids remind us that civilizations can thrive without war, conquest, or large armed forces. Caral grew through cooperation, trade, and social harmony. Caral is located in the Supi Valley of Peru, a region that at first glance might seem unfriendly for ancient settlement. The valley lies north of Lima, a few hours' drive from the busy capital, though the route there is not especially beautiful by modern tourism standards. Yet this same valley served as the birthplace for one of the earliest known civilizations in the Americas. Its environment is a mix of coastal desert, river oasis, and mountainous highlands not too far inland. Because of these natural contrasts, inhabitants of the region had access to different resources, from fish and shellfish in the nearby Pacific waters to cotton, gourds, and other crops along the fruitful strips fed by the Soup River. Caral itself is situated on a desert terrace overlooking the Supe River, which flows down from the Andean foothills. This portion of Peru's coastline is generally dry, with little vegetation away from the banks of the river. Without irrigation, many stretches of land remain dry and covered in sand or rocks. However, near the river, the land becomes farmable, allowing ancient settlers to grow important plants and manage small-scale agriculture. This contrast between the dryness of the desert and the greenness of the river's edge made it a unique setting for a developing civilization. People could establish permanent settlements because they had a reliable, though sometimes modest, water source for crops and drinking. The environment may not have been lush in the same way as a tropical region, but it was enough for those with cleverness and an ability to adapt. The broader region around Supe Valley includes other valleys such as Huaura and Pativilca to the north, each separated by mountainous terrain or desert-wide areas. Caral is often considered the prize of Norte Chico, but it is actually part of a cluster of sites that reflect a shared cultural pattern. The useful location of Caral in the middle of this cluster might have given it an advantage, allowing it to become a central hub for trading, ceremonial activities, and leadership. It is not just the site's position relative to the river, but also its close distance to the ocean. The coast is not extremely far, meaning that those who lived in Caral could potentially make contact with fishing communities or traders passing along the shoreline. This closeness helped the movement of fish, salt, and shells inland, and in the opposite direction, cotton and agricultural goods could be transported to coastal communities. The climate in this part of Peru has relatively mild temperatures because of the Humboldt Current, which keeps the coast cooler than one might expect for a tropical latitude. However, the region experiences very little rainfall, leading to a desert-like atmosphere away from river valleys. This dryness helps in the preservation of organic materials, which is partly why researchers have been able to find textile fragments, plant remains, and other organic items at Caral that might otherwise have decayed in a more humid environment. The same dryness, though, would have posed challenges to the ancient inhabitants in their efforts to maintain agriculture and stable water sources. Despite these problems, the Caral civilization made good use of the Supe River and perhaps smaller tributaries or canals. There may have been periodic flooding that deposited nutrient-rich silt, improving the fertility of the valley floor. By positioning their major ceremonial and residential structures on slightly higher ground, the people of Caral could protect their architectural achievements from flood damage. The large platforms, plazas, and pyramids also benefited from the stable desert ground, allowing their structures to remain relatively well preserved beneath layers of sand over thousands of years. Researchers studying Caral's location have pointed out the importance of its views. From the tops of the pyramids, one can see across a broad stretch of the surrounding terrain, including the route the river takes and other smaller settlement mounds dotting the valley. This wide vantage point may have been intentional, as ancient leaders or priests could have observed ceremonies, watched the agricultural fields, or even monitored trade caravans moving through. Though the area lacks towering peaks like the high Andes further inland, the local landscape still affords a measure of visibility and control. The presence of a slight elevation in the terrain, coupled with the major platforms built by the inhabitants, makes Caral stand out within this stretch of the valley. Geographers and archaeologists often discuss the importance of the so-called maritime foundations of Andean civilization. This concept suggests that the abundance of maritime resources like fish and shellfish allowed coastal and near-coastal populations in ancient Peru to develop stable food supplies, which in turn freed some members of the community to engage in specialized tasks such as construction, administration, and religious activities. Caral's location near enough to the ocean to benefit from its resources, yet still inland with access to agricultural land, seems to confirm that idea. Surplus marine products, combined with cotton cultivation in the fertile valley, likely played a role in supporting economic growth and social complexity. Another factor to consider is Caral's relative isolation from other powerful cultures that would later dominate the Andes. Several thousand years after Caral's peak, societies like the Chavin, the Moche, and ultimately the Inca rose to importance. Caral predates these cultures, and at the time it flourished, the region was not under the control of a larger empire or organized political group outside the Supe and neighboring valleys. This gave Caral the space to develop its own architectural style, social structure, and economic systems without direct interference. Its geographic setting may have partly sheltered it from the conflicts or population pressures that sometimes arise when multiple major powers occupy neighboring territories. Instead, Caral served as something of an attempt in large-scale community living, centered on ceremonial complexes and trade networks rather than on conquest. The landscape around Caral also contained various resources beyond arable land and fish. Stones and minerals from the foothills were crucial for construction and tool-making. Cotton grown in the valley was essential for making fishing nets, textiles, and possibly carrying bags used in trade. The climate allowed for certain crops like gourds and beans to be grown successfully, which may have complemented the fishing yields to create a balanced diet. Indeed, the relationship between coastal and inland resources was one of the site's greatest geographic strengths. Exploring Caral's location today still requires a journey through small towns and winding roads that lead away from Lima's urban spread. The approach reveals a gradual transition from urban landscapes to more rural farmland and finally to patches of desert. The site itself is marked by low-lying pyramidal structures and a large central plaza that might not immediately appear impressive compared to better-known ruins, but the significance lies in what these structures represent for early urban planning in the New World. The vantage from the main pyramid offers a clear view of the river valley, a reminder of the delicate balance the ancient inhabitants struck between the dryness of the desert and the life-giving water of the super river. In analysing Caral's geography, researchers also look at how climate changes over time might have impacted the civilization. The central coast of Peru has seen changes in rainfall and river flow due to El Niño events. These shifts can be sudden, bringing heavy rains and flooding, followed by periods of extreme dryness. Whether such repeating changes influenced Caral's development or contributed to its eventual decline remains an open question. Some studies indicate that if rainfall patterns change drastically, the agriculture that sustained Caral might have become more difficult to maintain, driving people to either adapt or relocate. Although Caral is the most prominent site in its immediate vicinity, it is part of a wide cultural landscape. This broader network includes Aspero, a coastal site near the mouth of the Sup River, as well as other inland centres like Vishama, which share architectural and cultural traits. The geographic connections among these sites underline the significance of the Sup region as a cradle of early civilization. Some believe that Caral served as the administrative or religious core of a network that stretched from the coast inward, linking fishermen, farmers, artisans, and priests in a working socio-economic system. That system could function only if trade routes were reliable and if the environmental conditions allowed for consistent production of surplus goods. The pretty beauty that visitors see when standing on one of Caral's pyramids is striking in its contrasts. The green ribbon of land along the river emerges as a strong slash of life against the surrounding desert. In the distance, gentle hills lead toward the higher peaks of the Andes. On a clear day, there might be a glimpse of the distant Pacific coastline if one knows where to look. It is not a setting of lush forests or easily tamed plains, but rather a landscape that demands adaptation, planning, and respect for the patterns of the environment. The people who built Caral appear to have done exactly that, aligning their society with the opportunities and limits offered by their geographic surroundings. Caral's location is thus both a challenge and an asset in understanding how early civilizations formed in the Americas. The partial isolation encouraged self-reliance and creativity, while the river and the nearby ocean ensured access to food and trade. This interaction shaped Caral's identity, allowing it to grow into a major ceremonial center without having to follow the exact path of other ancient cultures around the world. As researchers continue to investigate the Sup Valley and its neighboring regions, further insights into how geography influenced Caral's rise, organization, and ultimate fate will likely come to light. The location is part of the civilization's essential story, woven with its architectural marvels, social structures, and lasting mystery. The first round of scientific dating, done toward the end of the 20th century, produced results that shocked the archaeological community. The proof showed that Caral lived as early as the late 4th millennium BCE, or early 3rd millennium BCE, putting it roughly alongside the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and even older than many well-known Mesoamerican sites. Dating Caral was not easy. Researchers mainly used radiocarbon dating, which means measuring the breakdown of carbon parts in organic materials. This method works best when good organic samples are available, such as charcoal, cloth, plant remains, or other materials that were once living. In Caral's case, the dry desert weather turned out to be a stroke of good luck. The low moisture and very little rain helped keep fibers, seeds, and small pieces of wood or cane used in building work in good condition. Archaeologists carefully took these samples from layered deposits, making sure to record their exact spots. Since correct dating also depends on the setting in which a sample is found, a lot of work went into mapping the site's layers, buildings, and any connected materials. The first published results came out in the late 1990s, followed by more detailed studies in the early 2000s. Several labs in different parts of the world took part to make sure the data was trustworthy. Samples included small pieces of reeds, bits of cotton cloth, and even remains from fire pits where people once cooked or carried out rituals. The steady match of the data across different labs gave archaeologists confidence that Caral's main platforms and open areas were truly built between about 3000 and 2600 BCE, matching what some call the late Archaic period in the central Andes. This was a time before the wide use of pottery in many parts of the region, which showed how advanced Caral was for its time. One interesting part of the dating process involved comparing building stages. As more of Caral's buildings were dug out, it became clear that they had been built and changed over hundreds of years. Radiocarbon samples from the lower parts of a pyramid, for example, would give an older date than samples taken near the top of the structure. By putting together a series of these dates, archaeologists could build a timeline that showed the site's steady, or almost steady, occupation over many centuries. This was not a place that suddenly appeared and disappeared. Instead, it grew, spread, and adjusted over the course of hundreds of years. The dating of Caral had instant effects on how the rise of complex societies in the Andes was understood. Before Caral's age was confirmed, common belief held that large urban centers in the region did not appear until at least the 2nd millennium BCE, with civilizations like the Chavin, or later the Moshi. Caral's new, much earlier timeline showed that the roots of Andean civilization went back much further. This change in timeline forced a new look at the factors that led to urban growth in Peru. Some experts suggested that the push for Caral's rise was a mix of sea resources, cotton farming, and the need for group organization to handle trade and irrigation. Whatever the reason, the dating evidence changed the usual story. Comparisons with other major ancient civilizations added more interest. The radiocarbon dates place Caral in the same general age range as the Egyptian pyramids and the city-states of Sumer. This did not mean that the Caral people were more advanced, or that they had the same level of state development as Egypt or Mesopotamia, but it did mean that complex urban societies were forming in the Americas at a time that matched those regions more closely than earlier believed. Historical results became more widely accepted, a few disagreements appeared. Some critics questioned the margin of error in radiocarbon dating. Others pointed out that Caral lacked certain signs of civilization, often linked with regions like Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley, such as a writing system or metal tools. However, the absence of certain technologies or customs did not cancel out the presence of pyramids, open gathering areas, organized labor, trade networks, and social levels. Scholars reminded others that each civilization grows in its own way, and the presence or absence of certain features does not automatically dismiss the complexity or age of a culture. Another area of debate involved how best to understand the earliest dates in Caral. The range from the late 4th millennium to the early 3rd millennium BCE suggests a slow process of development. Some archaeologists believe that small groups began to gather around the Soup Valley several centuries before the actual pyramids were built. According to this view, the changes at Caral may have happened over generations, with simpler forms of community life leading to large building projects. In this sense, the dating is not just about giving Caral a birth date, but also about understanding how and why people joined together to form an early urban centre. The success of radiocarbon dating for Caral also encouraged more detailed methods like accelerator mass spectrometry, which can test smaller samples and possibly give more exact dates. Repeated tests on new samples continue to improve the timeline for when each pyramid or open area was built or rebuilt. Although the main story stays the same, these updates help archaeologists see periods of growth, possible declines, and expansions. Some structures show signs of rebuilding that may have happened every few decades or centuries. This suggests that Caral's people kept putting effort into the site, strengthening its role as a ceremonial or political centre. The dating work also led researchers to study other sites around Caral for comparison. A wider group of settlements in the Soup Valley and nearby valleys were tested, and some were found to have dates just as old. This proved that Caral was not the only ancient place, although Caral stood out as the largest and most developed among them. The collected proof of many dated sites strengthened the idea that the so-called Norte Chico civilization was one of the earliest in the Americas. This whole region was alive with group projects, specialized crafts, and possibly shared religious practices. The people in the Soup Valley were building large structures around the same time that other parts of the world were also beginning early urban growth. One of the most surprising finds from the dating process was the discovery of reed mats and fiber materials used in building bases. Archaeologists found that these mats, placed between layers of stones and mortar, acted as a kind of shock absorber or leveling layer. Radiocarbon tests on the fibers in these mats allowed for very focused dating of each building stage. This level of detail gave insights into how far certain buildings may have been put up, how often they were enlarged or fixed, and how each pyramid compared in age to the others. It also showed the cleverness of the Caral people. They used the resources they had, reeds from wet areas, cotton from nearby fields, to design stable bases for huge buildings. Thanks to the careful dating work, Caral came to be seen not just as an old city, but as a possible source for Andean urban culture. The timeline suggests that its influence may have spread beyond its own valley in ways not fully understood. Later Andean civilizations such as the Chavin, the Paracas, and later the Inca, all rose within a larger tradition that, in some ideas, traces back to Caral. The exact ways these ideas spread remain debated. However, the older the confirmed dates for Caral become, the more likely it is that later Andean cultures borrowed or adjusted certain religious practices, building designs or group structures from this early civilization. A continuing effort in the area of dating looks at environmental clues, such as studying soil layers in the Super River or looking at pollen samples in the region to see how the climate changed over time. By linking those clues with the building and cultural phases found through radiocarbon dating, scholars hope to see if climate changes lined up with major building projects or times of abandonment. The goal is to learn whether certain weather events pushed growth or forced changes at Caral. If a major drought happened, for example, people might have responded by creating new irrigation methods or turning more to sea resources. These studies could show how strong or weak Caral's people were, giving a clearer picture of how they managed to last for so long. In modern discussions, Caral's dates have become an important point when talking about the global timeline of civilization. Historians and teachers sometimes mention Caral as proof that the Americas had advanced cultures living at the same time as the earliest states of the Old World. This fact alone changes the common story, challenging views that once placed the Americas on a later or less developed timeline. Caral shows that complexity can arise anywhere humans are able to organize, make use of resources, and build group structures. The dating of Caral also matters for questions of heritage and identity in Peru. Knowing that the region had such ancient city life gives modern Peruvians a sense of deep historical connection. Each new radiocarbon test or archaeological paper adds new layers to that story, showing the depth and richness of Andean civilization. Some locals in the Super Valley take pride in the fact that their land is home to one of the world's oldest cities, and they often help research teams by giving labour, sharing local knowledge, and offering support. This teamwork helps protect Caral's heritage for the future, while key values that shaped daily life. Families, in whatever form they took, were probably central to social life. Children would have been taught the skills needed to keep up household tasks and later take part in community projects. Through watching, copying, and guided practice, younger members learned how to manage fields, care for tools, and keep cultural traditions alive. Since Caral was a settled community, steadiness was an important goal, meaning that knowledge had to be passed from one generation to the next. Whether teaching crop rotation, irrigation methods, or the details of weaving, people relied on daily interactions to shape Caral's lasting legacy. Part of this steadiness involved ceremonies and shared rituals that likely marked daily routines. Although the exact nature of these rituals remains under debate, they probably helped strengthen social bonds and a sense of group identity. Daily life would have included not just labour and chores, but also shared events that celebrated harvests, marked seasonal changes, or honoured ancestral spirits. These gatherings, centred at the platform mounds and plazas, would have supported unity among people who depended on one another for survival in a tough environment. Housing in Caral varied in size, suggesting that different families or social groups may have had different levels of access to resources. Some buildings were more spacious, possibly showing higher status. Others were simpler, reflecting either lower status or smaller family units. Walls were often built using a mix of stone and mortar or adobe-like materials. Floors sometimes had mats or coverings that helped keep out the sandy ground. In such homes, daily tasks included cleaning, fixing walls, and maintaining living areas to ensure comfort and safety. Over time, homes might have been expanded or rebuilt to fit growing families or newly gained wealth, shown by the presence of luxury items like beads or carved objects. Another part of daily life involved personal decorations and ornamentation. Even though the civilization dates back thousands of years, there is evidence that people of Caral wore jewellery or decorative items. Shell beads, pendants, and other decorative pieces have been found, some made from materials not found locally. These finds suggest that Caral had trade routes that reached beyond the immediate region, bringing rare materials into the city. Wearing such decorations could show status, but it could also be a part of everyday cultural expression, just as modern societies wear jewellery to show personal identity. Social events that took place around shared courtyards may have been times when neighbours exchanged stories, shared the latest news, and continued ongoing talks about civic projects. In a civilization without a formal writing system, oral tradition took centre stage. Knowledge about planting schedules, religious beliefs, craft methods, and local stories travelled through spoken word in daily conversation. Elders likely served as keepers of shared wisdom, while younger people learned both practical skills and cultural stories by listening and watching. Those who left the city each morning to fish or gather reeds from the river might have returned in the evening with their goods, ready to trade with neighbours or share with their household. Others may have spent the day weaving cotton or making fishing nets. Still others handled community projects such as fixing a section of the pyramid-like structures or strengthening the canal system before the start of the next farming season. This repeating cycle of work, family and community duties formed the base of daily life in Caral. Besides these tasks, fun or free-time activities likely existed. Music, as already mentioned, may have been one source of enjoyment. Shared storytelling, dancing, or gatherings around a fire in the cool evening were also likely ways to relax and bond. Shared laughter, conversation, and simple celebrations would have broken up the routine of farming and building, reminding everyone that life was not only about survival, but also about building a sense of belonging. The role of spirituality in daily life can be guessed from the various altars, ceremonial rooms, and burnt offerings found on site. Though not every day may have been a major religious event, smaller daily rituals could have involved simple offerings or prayers. People might have paused to give thanks for a successful fishing trip or a good harvest, believing that spiritual forces affected their fortunes. Even household chores, such as lighting a small fire in the morning, could carry a ritual meaning if done with the aim of honouring gods or ancestral spirits. Throughout Caral, there also seems to have been a focus on cleanliness and order. The overall layout of the city shows careful planning, which would shape everyday habits. Streets and paths were likely kept clear so that people could carry goods from one area to another without trouble. Schedules or routines for sweeping shared areas or throwing out waste may have formed part of the daily duties of households. While it is not possible to know every detail of their cleaning methods, the long-lasting occupation of Caral suggests effective ways of keeping the city livable for hundreds of years. There is also the question of child raising and learning. Children in Caral probably learned by helping parents in tasks suited to their age and watching older siblings as they worked. As they grew, they would move on to more complex tasks, eventually becoming skilled in farming, weaving, fishing, or the technical parts of building and maintaining structures. Formal schooling in the modern sense did not exist, but a system of training and mentoring formed the main way of passing on cultural knowledge and practical skills. Language and communication were obviously vital parts of daily life. Though no formal writing system has been found at Caral, a system of symbols or quipu-like devices might have existed to keep track of trade or farm yields. Most exchanges, however, would have been spoken, using a shared language that carried not just words, but also the cultural and spiritual meaning of the community. This oral culture shaped how stories and traditions were kept. Over countless evenings, elders told the legends of Caral's founding or the meaning of certain structures, while younger listeners absorbed not only the facts, but also the cultural values built into those stories. Another daily factor was the environment itself. Residents dealt with the challenges of the desert coast, such as changes in temperature and limited rainfall. Dressing for the climate likely involved clothes made from woven cotton that allowed for breathability. People may have sought shade in shared spaces during the hottest parts of the day, especially if major building work or shared labour was planned. The location near the river valley gave them enough fertile land to plant crops, but it also meant staying aware of possible changes in the water supply. A sudden shift in the flow of the river could disrupt irrigation and daily routines. Despite the complexities of life in Caral, there was likely a rhythm to each day. The rising sun might have signalled the start of labour in the fields, the weaving area, or the fishing trip. As shadows grew longer, families might have gathered to share the day's results and prepare the evening meal. Even with the demands of survival, people likely had moments of rest or socialising. A typical day would blend labour, shared interaction, spirituality, and art, all forming a unified cultural whole. Throughout Caral's long history, these daily patterns built a sense of identity and continuity. Generations came and went, but the city's foundations stayed. Although the civilization eventually declined for reasons still debated by researchers, ranging from environmental changes to a possible shift in trade routes, its everyday life left a clear mark on the Soup Valley. The remains of homes, plazas, irrigation systems and objects tell the story of a society that valued teamwork, skill and balance with the environment. Caral's lack of defensive walls and absence of clear military items shows that daily life was probably more focused on shared welfare than on conflict. This does not necessarily mean there was no tension or competition within the society, but it does suggest that major conflicts or wars were not a main feature of this civilization. Instead, the people of Caral seem to have directed their energy toward activities that improved community living, such as building huge structures, improving farming methods, and making cultural objects like musical instruments. Although the exact population size of Caral is hard to determine, some estimates range from a few thousand residents to larger numbers across the wider Soup Valley. Whatever the actual number, everyday life in Caral revolved around making sure that these men, women and children were clothed, fed, and included in social structures that supported teamwork and shared identity. By studying the remains of daily life, modern researchers gain insight into how one of the oldest known cities in the Americas managed to support itself and grow. Each home in Caral, whether simple or more impressive, was a centre of personal and family life. People slept, ate, stored their belongings, and perhaps shared stories under the same roof. Life events such as birth, illness, and death happened within these walls, tying individuals together in shared experiences. Over time, these personal histories added up, shaping how the community as a whole viewed its shared past and future. In small ways that happened daily, the residents strengthened the social unity that would allow Caral to last for centuries. Today, observers can walk among the remains of this ancient city and think about the daily routines that once filled it with life. Although the exact details cannot all be known, the archaeological evidence offers enough clues to rebuild a picture of a peaceful, cooperative society that understood how to use the resources of the Soup Valley. People woke up each morning with tasks to do, families to care for, and a shared goal of supporting their place in a changing natural landscape. Their days were marked by hard work, shared gatherings, creative expression, and the gentle mix of the earthly and the spiritual. In a simple but powerful way, daily life in Caral was both ordinary and special. Ordinary because the tasks of getting food, building shelter, and raising children are universal. Special because the scale of the building and farming achievements shows an advanced level of organisation and group drive for such an early civilization. In this way, the people of Caral offer a view of how human societies can work smoothly without constant violence and conflict. Their focus on shared effort, flexibility, and cultural expression carved out a unique chapter in human history that still matters today. Social structure in Caral was based on a complex system of cooperation, hierarchy, and shared responsibilities that helped this civilization to grow for centuries. While a complete picture of the social organization may never be fully known, archaeological evidence offers strong signs about how power, labor, and cultural values were shared. The presence of large-scale communal projects like the pyramids, plazas, and irrigation systems shows that people were capable of coordinating labor beyond the scope of small family units. This cooperation likely relied on a form of leadership that could gather resources and people, but it did not necessarily look like the kingship or ruling class systems found in places like ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. One key piece of evidence suggesting some sort of governing authority or elite class is the scale of the monumental architecture. It would have required a lot of planning and a workforce that was both motivated and organised over long periods. This points to a social structure in which decision-makers could bring together hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals around large projects. However, the exact nature of these leaders is still argued about. They may have been spiritual figures such as priests, or they might have been individuals recognised for their administrative skills. The absence of fancy tombs or clear symbols of royalty leaves open the possibility that leadership was not held by a single person or dynasty. Social stratification likely existed in Caral, but it may not have been as strict as in later civilizations. Differences in housing size, the location of residences, and the presence of luxury items like certain ornaments or rare materials all indicate that some people had more resources or status than others. Larger homes or residences located closer to ceremonial centres might have been occupied by those with a higher social standing. In contrast, smaller dwellings on the outskirts could have belonged to labourers or lower status families. At the same time, the communal nature of Caral's major projects suggests that these different groups worked together regularly and relied on one another for the city's overall success. Gender roles in Caral's social structure are not entirely clear, though some evidence might be taken from burial contexts and the distribution of artefacts. If men and women were buried with different types of tools or offerings, that could provide a hint about their societal functions. However, clear conclusions are difficult given the site's age and the incomplete nature of the art. While Caral appears to have been free of widespread warfare, there might still have been minor forms of conflict or competition within the society. Disputes over resource allocation, land use or labour contributions are common in any community. Ways for conflict resolution likely existed, possibly led by community elders, religious leaders, or individuals recognised for their wisdom. Shared rituals and ongoing collaboration on major public works could have eased tensions by redirecting competitive energies into communal projects. Social mobility in Caral, if it existed, would have depended on individual skill, family ties, and possibly the favour of those in leadership positions. A talented weaver or musician might have gained recognition and improved status. A family that effectively managed farmland or water channels might have gradually grown its influence. Conversely, a loss of resources or a failure to meet communal obligations might have led to decreased standing in the community. However, the level of openness or strictness of such mobility remains unknown, given the limited historical record. Leadership itself might have been shared, with councils or assemblies representing different segments of society. Some researchers speculate that certain platform structures were used for public gatherings where community matters were discussed. If so, Caral may have had a system of governance that balanced various voices, ensuring that no single leader held absolute power. Such an arrangement would fit with the cooperative spirit guessed from the city's extensive communal projects. The concept of reciprocity, which is common in many ancient Andean societies, probably played a major part in Caral's social structure. Reciprocity involved the idea that members of a community owed each other mutual support. If a family received assistance in building a home or repairing irrigation channels, they would be expected to repay that support in some form at a later date. This give-and-take approach created webs of obligation that bound the community together, ensuring that everyone contributed to and benefited from communal resources. It also worked as a social safety net, making certain that no single group was permanently disadvantaged. Craft specialization might have been another factor shaping Caral's social complexity. As the city grew, the demand for specific goods, textiles, pottery, jewellery, fishing nets would have increased. Skilled artisans who excelled at these crafts gained social importance. Although there is not a lot of evidence of specialized workshops, the presence of items like finely crafted flutes and textiles implies that some individuals specialized in making these goods. If artisans commanded respect or had special access to rare materials, they could have gained a higher standing in society, influencing the social hierarchy. Because Caral is a pre-ceramic culture in many respects, the usual ceramic-based markers of social differentiation are not as obvious here as in later civilizations. The city's reliance on cotton for textiles and fishing nets indicates that cloth and cloth making served as clear markers of social distinction. Those who possessed beautiful or elaborate textiles might have displayed their higher status. Ritual events might have allowed people to wear their best woven garments, further showing differences in wealth or influence. Nonetheless, It is worth noting that the city's lack of showy luxury graves suggests that Caral did not practice the same level of social stratification found in other ancient cultures with grand burial traditions. Another interesting aspect is the minimal evidence of weaponry in Caral. Some have taken this as a clue that conflict was generally not central to the social structure. In many ancient societies, a warrior class can be a significant determinant of status and leadership, but Caral may not have built a formal warrior elite. Instead, authority seems to have been directed through agricultural coordination, spiritual rituals, and large-scale building projects. This reliance on communal cooperation over militaristic dominance offers an alternative vision of how early civilizations could be organized. Social ties were possibly strengthened through feasting or communal meals on important occasions. Feasting events might have marked harvests, the start of a building project, or religious festivities. Such gatherings could break down social boundaries for a time, allowing people of different statuses to share food, music, and stories. Although elites or leaders might have provided the bulk of the resources for these events, the collective participation would reinforce communal bonds and affirm leadership roles in a festive atmosphere rather than a purely forceful one. The long life of Caral also hints that whatever social structure existed was relatively effective at navigating environmental changes and managing social tensions for hundreds of years. If the city was indeed inhabited for centuries, it suggests that the social framework, while not immune to change or stress, offered enough stability and adaptability for the people to remain. This could have been influenced by the cyclic nature of labour projects, the spiritual roots of leadership, and the emphasis on cooperative resource management, all of which combined to maintain social order. Sometime around the decline of Caral, the social structures that had held the civilization together began to fall apart. This might have been due to environmental shifts, changes in trade routes, or other factors. As irrigation systems failed or became too hard to maintain, families may have moved to more fertile regions. Without the communal labour needed to keep large platforms and plazas in good condition, these monumental structures began to break down. The leaders, if they were unable to fix the situation or justify their authority through religious or practical means, could have lost their hold on the community. Although the site was eventually abandoned, the echoes of Caral's social framework persisted in the archaeological record, offering modern researchers insights into one of the earliest complex societies in the Americas. Caral's spiritual and ceremonial life can be seen through the remnants of altars, fire pits, musical instruments, and certain architectural features that suggest ritual practice. Although no written records survive to explain the exact beliefs of this ancient society, archaeologists have gathered substantial evidence from the city's design and the artifacts found within. The presence of clear ceremonial areas, which might include plazas and upper rooms atop pyramids, strongly indicates that religious events took main stage in Caral's communal life. Some researchers suggest that the city's layout itself, with its special orientation and zoning, could have held symbolic meaning related to cosmology or the spiritual world. Excavations have also uncovered possible offerings, such as burned plant remains and other items that may have served as votive gifts to please deities or spiritual forces. By examining these clues, specialists can form ideas about the nature of Caral's religious world, even though the absence of a written script leaves many details hard to know. One of the most interesting aspects of Caral's religious life is the discovery of circular sunken plazas near some of the pyramids. These plazas often feature staircases leading down into what appears to have been a special ritual area. The design suggests that worshippers may have gathered in these sunken circular courts for ceremonies or communal rites. Archaeologists have found evidence of burnt offerings, ash deposits, and other signs that rituals involved fire. Some have proposed that these plazas could have been the setting for performances, where priests or spiritual leaders might have conducted ceremonies in front of an audience standing around the plaza's perimeter. This arrangement could also have boosted sound, enhancing the overall experience. The circular design likely served practical purposes such as acoustics, but it may also have held symbolic significance, possibly reflecting ideas about the repeating nature of life, the cosmos, or agricultural cycles. Offerings and sacrificial elements discovered in Caral provide more direct evidence of religious or spiritual practices. Although no clear proof of large-scale human sacrifices has come to light, some smaller-scale rituals involving objects or possibly animals may have taken place. Artifacts found in ceremonial contexts include figurines, cotton textiles, and various organic remains that seem to have been intentionally burned or buried. These acts suggest that the people of Caral believed in a form of give and take with spiritual forces, where gifts or symbolic items were offered in exchange for blessings, protection, or the well-being of the community. The fact that Caral thrived in a challenging desert environment, relying heavily on river systems for agriculture, might have strengthened the importance of rituals aimed at ensuring water supply and good growing conditions. Without direct written records, researchers can only guess that these actions were attempts to maintain harmony between the physical world and the unseen powers believed to guide it. Music appears to have played a key role in Caral's spiritual practices. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous flutes and horns made from animal bones, shells, and other natural materials. Some of these instruments are carefully crafted, indicating that their production was likely a specialized craft. The link of these instruments with ceremonial complexes such as the pyramids or sunken plazas implies that music accompanied important rituals. Certain flutes discovered in Caral are capable of producing a wide range of tones, suggesting that music might have been more complex and structured than simple rhythmic chanting. Whether it was used to call deities, set the atmosphere for communal gatherings, or express shared devotion, music clearly held a significant place in Caral's ceremonial activities. In many ancient cultures, music served to bring together participants emotionally, reinforcing communal bonds and shared beliefs. The same could have been true for Caral, where group rituals might have included coordinated performances that spread across the plazas. Fire features strongly in various ritual contexts across Caral. Archaeologists have identified set fire pits or altars at higher levels in the pyramids, on terraces, and in sunken plazas. Burned remains of plant substances such as seeds or reeds suggest that offerings were placed into these fires. The controlled use of fire in these chosen locations supports the idea that religious specialists or priests managed these ceremonies, calling on spiritual forces or conducting rites for the benefit of the community. The symbolism of fire may have represented change, cleaning, or communication with the divine. Fire-based rituals are common in many ancient societies, so Caral fits into a broader pattern in which communities use the powerful element of flame for ceremonial purposes. An interesting detail is that some of these fire pits contain layers of ash and soil, indicating repeated usage. This repetition implies that rituals were not isolated events, but part of a continuous religious calendar or cycle. Architectural elements linked with Caral's religious sphere extend beyond just the pyramids and plazas. In some structures, researchers have found niches, small compartments, or hidden rooms that could have been used to store sacred objects, ritual tools, or offerings. These carefully concealed spaces point to the planned design of architecture that served both practical and sacred functions. Although these niches may appear modest by modern standards, their placement and construction in key locations suggest that items stored there held spiritual meaning. The act of placing offerings or symbolic objects into these recesses may have been accompanied by prayers or spoken words, marking them as sacred deposits within the built environment. Over time, as structures were remodeled or expanded, some of these spaces were sealed, leaving behind sealed context for archaeologists to discover many centuries later. The role of a priestly or spiritual class in Caral society is a topic of significant academic interest. Some interpret the scale and complexity of the ceremonial complexes as evidence that a powerful priestly group managed the religious life of the city, guiding or coordinating events that involved a large number of people. The careful location of ceremonial spaces on elevated platforms would have visually set spiritual leaders apart during communal gatherings. That separation could have reinforced the idea that they held special knowledge or had unique connections to the supernatural world. Whether these leaders claimed divine right or ancestral authority is unknown, but their influence likely extended beyond religious matters into social, political, or economic decisions. If the building and maintenance of pyramids and plazas required coordinated labor, it makes sense that the same authority that governed spiritual life might have also organized communal efforts. Communal feasting and gatherings in religious contexts could have served as a unifying force for the people of Caral. During these events, individuals from different kin groups, neighborhoods, or social levels might have come together to share food, exchange gifts, and strengthen social bonds under the watchful eye of spiritual leaders. The production of large-scale architecture such as pyramids implies that Caral could gather significant labor forces, and religious gatherings might have been one way of building collective identity. Feasts and ceremonies often go together in many ancient cultures, helping unify participants through shared rituals that bring out feelings of belonging and communal purpose. In a place like Caral, which thrived in a tough desert environment, collective efforts and social unity were likely vital for survival. The role of religion in supporting that unity, therefore, cannot be underrated. Another part of Caral's rituals revolves around the importance of cotton, an important crop in this region. Although cotton is often discussed in terms of trade and textile production, it may also have held a spiritual aspect. Cotton could have been used for making ritual clothing, ceremonial tapestries, or even cords and bags, shikras, for offerings. Its role in everyday life was substantial, but in the context of religious ceremonies, cotton might have symbolized fertility, prosperity, or a connection to the land. The act of weaving textiles, especially finely crafted ones, can take on a devotional character in many ancient societies, reflecting patience and a dedication to communal ideals. Specialized weavers might have produced textiles specifically for use in rituals, marking them as sacred objects that carried special blessings or status. While solid evidence of the group of gods or specific deities of Caral remains hard to find, some researchers suspect that nature deities or agricultural gods played a key part in the city's religion. The uncertain nature of life in a desert valley, dependent on river waters and the cyclical abundance of fish along the coast, would logically lead to beliefs that sought to ensure environmental harmony. Seasonal ceremonies might have been directed towards securing enough rainfall in the highlands, stable river flows, or rich harvests. The wide plazas and pyramids possibly served as communal platforms to ask for such blessings. Because Caral's climate and landscape differ from those of other early civilizations, it follows that its religious ideas may have also developed in unique ways. Environmental unpredictability often drives human groups to form ritual systems that promise to maintain or restore balance. Caral's lack of visible fortifications and weapons stands in contrast to some other ancient societies that placed heavy emphasis on warfare. That difference may hint at a spiritual or communal mindset centered on cooperation rather than aggression. While the absence of clear military structures does not eliminate the possibility of conflict, it does raise the idea that Caral's inhabitants put more energy into religious and communal projects than into building walls or making weapons. Ritual gatherings, music, and public ceremonies could have played roles in conflict resolution, alliance formation, or social control. If political or social tensions existed, the community might have dealt with them through spiritual means, rather than resorting to violence on a grand scale. Although this interpretation remains a guess, it offers a perspective that Caral's religion was a key thread in the broader social fabric. In modern times, visitors who come to Caral often speak of a calm atmosphere filling the ancient plazas and platforms. Even without fully understanding the beliefs that once gave life to these spaces, people sense the lasting power of a place designed for ritual and communal gatherings. Archaeological findings such as carefully arranged altars, burnt offerings, and musical instruments reinforce the impression that Caral's spiritual life was lively, complex, and central to the city's identity. Each piece of evidence, whether a shard of pottery bearing ritual remains or a set of delicately carved flutes, puts together a narrative of faith, community, and continuity over centuries. By studying these remains of religious practice, researchers build a more complete picture of Caral as not just an urban centre, but also a spiritual heartland, where rituals and beliefs guided daily life, joined people together, and possibly shaped the community's historical path. Caral's economy worked in a tough environment that mixed dry desert land with the important water of the Super River. Even with the roughness of the nearby land, the people of Caral built a thriving city that included huge buildings, heavy farming, and long-distance trade systems. A close look at Caral's economic activities shows a detailed system in which people grew basic crops, took part in fishing, made textiles, and possibly traded goods with nearby areas up and down the Peruvian coast. This economic setup did not exist alone. Caral's leaders, or at least those who organised work, had to manage watering systems, plan crop planting, and think about how to move resources quickly from the coast to the inland city. These efforts show a society that was united and able to handle big projects together, matching the shared spirit seen in the city's huge buildings. Farming played a main role in Caral's economy. The Soup River's changing flow made watering possible, allowing crops such as squash, beans, and maybe maize to grow in a place that would otherwise support very little life. Cotton was one of the most important crops, as shown by the large amount of cotton textiles and cotton-related items found at the site. Cotton likely served many economic and cultural purposes, giving material for clothing, bags, and possibly trade. The presence of large cotton growing also suggests a big workforce dedicated to planting, caring for, and harvesting. The watering systems needed to keep these fields working involved careful planning, building canals, and sharing water rights among different groups. Because Caral shows few signs of fighting between groups, it is possible that the sharing of water was handled through community agreements or by religious or civic leaders who watched over the fair use of this important resource. Fishing was another main part of Caral's economy. The Pacific Ocean lies fairly close to the Soup Valley, making it possible for some people to gather fish and sea resources. Evidence suggests that dried fish was brought inland to Caral, giving a key source of protein. Over time, a trade system might have grown in which coastal groups traded fish for farm goods like cotton or other crops. This exchange shows a helpful relationship. The inland city gained sea protein, while coastal groups got fibres for textiles and possibly other farm produce. The steady flow of these goods back and forth would have strengthened Caral's stability, making sure that a bad harvest or problems at sea did not destroy the economy completely. Fishing tools from that time likely included reed boats, nets, and maybe harpoons, although the exact kind of these tools is still being studied. Trade stretched beyond local fishing and farming. Archaeologists have found materials at Caral that likely came from faraway places, including unusual goods such as spondylus shells, often linked with waters near Ecuador, and maybe other items that travelled along early trade paths. Although Caral was not as closely tied to far-reaching trade as later Andean civilizations like the Inca, the presence of these non-local items shows that some level of exchange took place. These trade contacts might have been helped by travelling traders who moved along the coast and through the valleys, trading goods, ideas, and cultural ways. The lack of strong defences in Caral suggests that trade and communication could happen without the constant fear of violent conflict, or at least not on a large scale. This open setting would have allowed trade systems to grow naturally, letting Caral's economic reach extend well beyond the Super Valley. Caral's textile making was a key part of its economic life. The large amount of cotton and the discovery of woven items and tools show that weaving was an important craft. Textiles might have served many uses, from everyday clothing to special garments used in religious ceremonies. They might also have worked as a form of money or as valuable trade goods. Highly skilled weavers, possibly organised in groups similar to guilds, might have focused on making high-quality textiles, which then moved among Caral's people, or were traded with nearby communities. Given the importance of textiles in many ancient Andean societies, it is reasonable to think that Caral also placed a high cultural value on weaving. This craft likely connected with social rank and religious practice, as seen in the possible ritual uses of cotton in offerings and ceremonies. Also, textile making creates reliance among different groups of people. Farmers grow cotton, spinners and weavers shape it, and traders move the finished goods. The building projects in Caral, including pyramids and plazas, also shaped the economy in quiet but important ways. Building huge structures required organised groups of workers, skilled makers, and steady access to building materials like stones and reeds. This means that a part of Caral's people were sometimes or always busy with construction instead of farming or fishing. Such big projects likely needed a well-planned system of work assignment, possibly led by an administrative or religious class. Workers might have been paid with food, textiles, or other goods for their efforts. As these projects took many years, the city's economic setup had to adjust to the changing needs of farm seasons and building schedules. This mixing of heavy construction and farming needs shows a balanced system in which Caral's leaders successfully gathered resources without harming the region's ability to feed and support the people. Given Caral's great age, it is surprising how advanced its economic system seemed to have been. Even though there is no clear proof of a formal money system or written records, trade and work organisation clearly reached a high level of skill. The use of quipu or other recording tools has been suggested, although clear proof linking quipu to Caral has not yet been found. Still, the detailed nature of Caral's economic work suggests that people kept track of debts, exchanges and work contributions in some way, whether through spoken memory, tokens, or a simple form of record keeping. The smooth running of farming, the gathering of building materials, and the movement of goods from the coast or faraway places all show an economic setup that needed planning and teamwork. This sets Caral apart as an early centre of regional exchange that points forward to the more complex trade systems of later Andean civilizations. A noticeable part of Caral's economy is the clear lack of war-related items. In many early civilizations, control of trade paths or rich land often led to conflicts that left behind proof in the form of defences, weapons and mass graves. Caral, however, shows little sign of such military activity. Some see this as a peaceful attitude shaped by community and religious cooperation. Others warn that the lack of proof does not always mean a lack of conflict. It might simply show different cultural ways of fighting or hiding weapons. Still, if Caral had taken part in major conflicts, some trace, whether in defences or in the layout of protective structures, would probably appear in the archaeological findings. Instead, the focus seems to have been on ceremonial buildings and public gathering places. That focus could show a diplomatic way of dealing with other valleys, or a strong cultural emphasis on community welfare and shared identity, which might have reduced open fighting. An interesting part of Caral's economy is how extra production might have helped the city rise. Extra cotton, fish, or other farm products could have been stored and shared by leaders or religious figures to strengthen social ties. During times of shortage, extra supplies could be used to support the people, strengthening the bond between the common people and the leaders. In exchange for safety and access to community projects, the people might have given their labour. This setup would allow big building projects to continue and trade connections to grow. Over many generations, a system like this could gather wealth in the hands of a small group, although the level of social ranking in Caral is still debated. The careful planning needed to keep extra supplies and guide sharing shows Caral's strong organisational skills. Cotton's usefulness also shaped economic roles. Some families might have focused on growing the plant, while others became skilled at spinning and weaving. Fishing groups lived closer to the coast, while another group of people took part in trade or building. This level of economic specialisation creates reliance among different parts of the population. Such a setup can increase productivity, but also creates weak points. If the fishing group faced a sudden drop in fish, or if dry weather harmed cotton fields, the whole community might suffer. The long success of Caral suggests that the people found ways to handle these risks, possibly through careful resource use and cooperative social ways. The community-focused side of Caral's religion may have helped bring these different economic interests together under shared beliefs and traditions. Over time, Caral's economic relationships likely changed, adding new trade partners and adjusting to environmental shifts. The Middle Soup Valley may have seen the rise of smaller nearby communities that worked regularly with the main city, either by supplying raw materials or by offering special crafts. These smaller settlements might have worked as points in a larger network, linking Caral to faraway places and helping the movement of goods, people, and cultural ideas. As Caral's population grew, so did the need for farmland, fishing areas, and raw materials. Good management of these resources would have been important to avoid environmental damage or social unrest. The long-lasting presence of Caral as a major centre suggests that the city handled these challenges well, at least until changes became too great and led to decline or transformation. Caral thrived in a region where the land met the sea, and the people living there found ways to care for crops while also taking advantage of marine resources. Although modern observers sometimes assume that ancient civilizations developed with large armies and major warfare, Caral does not appear to have been ruled by conflict. Instead, agriculture and food systems suggest a peaceful coexistence among the inhabitants, who seem to have organized themselves around shared labor and mutual benefit. This cooperation can be seen most clearly in their irrigation techniques and the production of crops, which were fitted to a valley environment that was both challenging and full of potential. Experts who have studied Caral point to the Soup Valley's climate and geography as key factors in how agriculture developed. The river that flowed through the valley provided the important water source, and a clever system of canals and channels helped direct water to farmland. Through a balance of environmental awareness and group effort, the people of Caral made their environment work for them. The Soup Valley receives limited rainfall, which means that successful agriculture usually depends on irrigation rather than relying solely on rain. In Caral, people took advantage of the river's seasonal patterns, ensuring that fields were well watered when it was most necessary. Excavations have revealed the remains of canal systems that likely required group labour. This indicates that agriculture was not something a single family or small band could handle alone. Rather, it was a community-wide project that called for the coordination of many individuals. When a valley relies on river irrigation, the timing of water flow and distribution becomes very important. Diverting water at the right time and to the right fields can mean the difference between a good harvest and a failure. Caral's inhabitants seem to have understood this idea well, as their ability to grow crops suggests they had a handle on controlling and directing water across multiple plots of land. A variety of crops have been identified in archaeological studies of Caral, including cotton, gourds, beans, and other staples. Cotton held a special place in the Caral economy because it was used to make fishing nets, which in turn allowed people to exploit marine resources. The presence of cotton in large quantities hints at a strong working connection between agriculture and fishing. Cotton grown in the valley would be spun into threads, then turned into nets that could be used along the coast to catch fish, which provided essential protein for the community. Once caught, the fish could be brought back inland or traded with other communities that did not have direct access to the sea. This mixing of agricultural production and maritime resources creates a picture of Caral as a hub of exchange, where people were not strictly bound to the fields or the waves but knew how to use both to support themselves. The growth of cotton also underscores the skill of Caral's inhabitants, since cotton requires a certain level of care, especially in an environment that is not drenched with rainfall year-round. Irrigation had to be carefully managed to ensure that cotton plants thrived, and the surplus produced probably exceeded the immediate local needs for basic living. That surplus likely fueled trade with neighbouring settlements who might have been eager to acquire cotton textiles or fishing nets in exchange for other goods. This kind of regional exchange could have contributed to Caral's economic stability. Since archaeologists have yet to find strong evidence of weapons or fortifications, it appears the people of Caral did not heavily invest in warfare, instead putting their energy into agricultural, ceremonial and communal activities. Beans and gourds were among the crops grown, providing nutritional variety. Beans in particular are high in protein when cooked, which could add to diets that also included fish or other marine life. Gourds are extremely useful for making containers and utensils, offering a biodegradable solution for carrying water or storing food. These practical uses speak to the cleverness of the Caral people, who showed a knack for growing things that served multiple purposes. Sweet potatoes, squash, and possibly other root vegetables also appear to have been grown, adding further variety to meals. Although the exact recipes and cooking methods are lost to time, it is likely that stews, porridges, or roasted vegetables were common dishes, and the rich marine harvest added flavour and nutritional balance. Archaeobotanical studies, which analyse plant remains in soil samples, have offered glimpses of the exact types of seeds and fibres present in Caral. These remains suggest that the local climate and riverside environment allowed for fairly strong agricultural production, at least by ancient standards. Preserved seeds, pollen, and microscopic evidence all help researchers understand how the land was farmed centuries ago. Thanks to these findings, experts have suggested that Caral's success rested on the way its inhabitants took advantage of various microclimates within the valley. Different crops would have been suited to slightly different conditions, and Caral's people seemed very aware of where best to plant each one. Their irrigation feats must have required a shared vision and a sense of long-term planning. Farming is not merely about planting seeds. It involves preparing the soil, managing water levels, waiting for growth, and then harvesting at the right time. If a carefully made canal system broke down or was poorly maintained, an entire season's crops might have been lost. Consequently, there likely existed some form of oversight, perhaps a council of elders or a group that specialised in water management, to ensure that fields were properly cared for. While the exact societal ranking remains a matter of debate, it is fairly clear that someone had to organise these tasks on a large scale. Monuments and public structures in Caral hint at a centralised authority that might have been tied to religious or ceremonial leadership, but the consistency of agricultural success would also have rested on the everyday actions of farmers, labourers, and families working the fields. Excess produce from Caral may have led to a form of specialisation. When enough people had a stable food source, some individuals could focus on making textiles, others on building pyramids, and still others on ceremonial or administrative roles. That is how most early civilizations grow. The surplus from farming supports other activities that define complex societies, such as architecture, artistry, and possibly trade negotiations. The layout of Caral's urban areas, with large public spaces and platform mounds, suggests that gatherings and rituals played an essential role in the community. These events in turn might have encouraged cooperation and contributed to a sense of shared identity. The relationship between Caral's people and the nearby ocean seems to have been smooth. By fishing off the coast, they could obtain a relatively steady supply of seafood, which then reduced the pressure on farmland. Marine resources can be extremely rich, particularly when upwelling currents bring nutrients to the surface. Caral residents possibly tapped into these rich waters with their cotton nets, hauling in fish that could be smoked, dried, or salted for storage and later consumption. Such a system would have made Caral less vulnerable to drought or crop failure. If the harvest was poor one year, there would still be fish, and vice versa. This give and take likely made Caral a strong community, capable of enduring shifts in climate or environmental changes better than a society that relied solely on agriculture or solely on marine resources. Some researchers propose that Caral's reliance on cotton for nets turned the Soup Valley into a key production centre. People from neighbouring areas who fished along the coast might have needed Caral's cotton goods, while Caral itself needed a steady supply of fish. This exchange network could have extended well beyond the immediate coastline, as fish might also have been traded inland, or the cotton could have been used to produce textiles for clothing and other purposes. The working connection between farmland and sea is a distinctive feature of the Caral culture, highlighting the creativity and adaptability of its people. Once crops were harvested, they had to be processed and stored. Even in the earliest forms of civilization, the difficulty of managing food surpluses can be substantial. Storage facilities, granaries, or communal buildings might have been constructed to keep grains, beans, and other produce safe from moisture and pests. Ceramic containers or gourd vessels could have been used to store seeds and dried food. While Caral's inhabitants did not leave behind detailed written records, the architectural remains do indicate that certain structures may have been set aside for food processing or warehousing. Given the mild climate of the region, drying or smoking foods would have been a practical method of preservation, so it is possible that fish and produce were preserved for long periods. The absence of walls or barricades around Caral encourages thought that the society was relatively peaceful, though this point has sparked debate. If people were not constantly fending off attackers, more of their group effort could go toward agricultural improvement, ceremonial building projects, and cultural development. This focus would also explain the level of skill seen in their terraced pyramids and communal spaces. The energy poured into these structures might have been made possible only by the steady agricultural base that ensured the population could be fed without everyone needing to farm full-time. In looking at Caral's agricultural system, some modern researchers see a model for lasting living in challenging environments. The canals likely needed regular maintenance to avoid sediment buildup or damage, and the fields had to be rotated or carefully managed to prevent soil exhaustion. Although intensive agriculture can wear out the land, Caral's long-lasting presence hints that the people found methods to preserve their farmland for generations. Perhaps they understood the nutrient cycles in the soil, introduced techniques that minimized erosion, or even coordinated planting schedules so that the river and its nutrients were used efficiently without overuse. Another angle to consider is favour or cosmic balance. Caral's platform mounds and gathering spaces might have been sites for communal prayers, offerings, or celebrations around planting and harvest times. Music, dance, or the burning of offerings may have gone along with these events, reinforcing bonds between community members and their leaders. The link between agriculture and religious observances can also promote social unity, as everyone relies on the success of the crops and the stability of the environment. Seeds discovered at Caral provide valuable clues about diet, but they also reflect trade networks, since certain plant species might not have been native to the Soup Valley. If seeds or plants came from distant regions, then trade routes must have existed, and Caral's status as a major site would have made it a centre of cultural exchange. This exchange might have been helped by caravans, river travel, or coastal sailing vessels that moved goods up and down the Pacific coastline. Over time, these interactions would shape the local cuisine, introducing new flavours and diversifying the agricultural profile of the region. Culinary practices in ancient Caral might have been simple compared to what people expect in the modern era. Still, the variety of ingredients available from both land and sea implies that meals could have been relatively well-rounded. Beans, squash, and possibly chili peppers could form the base of a stew, while dried fish or fresh catch could be added for protein. Over centuries, these dishes might have grown into distinct regional meals, though much of that knowledge has been lost. Nevertheless, the presence of grinding stones and other food processing tools suggests that Caral's inhabitants put thought and effort into preparing their meals. agriculture is likely connected with social rankings. Those in leadership positions could coordinate irrigation schedules and decide when to give out labour for canal upkeep or harvest help. They might also organise communal feasts to mark important events or celebrate successful harvests. During these gatherings, food would have been a centrepiece, served to participants while rituals or speeches took place on the platform mounds. By distributing food in a ceremonial setting, leaders reinforced their role as protectors and helpers of agricultural abundance, strengthening their right to lead in the eyes of the community. As centuries passed, the techniques and knowledge of farming probably became increasingly improved. Families or guilds might have specialised in certain crops, passing down their skills to younger generations. The culture of Caral placed value on both agriculture and maritime work, and the blend between these areas is one of the most striking qualities of this civilization. Even though Caral has often been overshadowed by the fame of Egypt or Mesopotamia, its agricultural practices reveal a deep understanding of complex ecosystems. This civilization took root in a dry valley, but found ways to make it flourish, showing a remarkable ability to adapt that still interests scholars today. In the broader setting, Caral challenges the story that early civilizations needed to rely mainly on domesticated animals or large-scale grain single-crop farming for their survival. Instead, here is a culture that balanced multiple food sources without leaving behind large proof of warfare. Some have taken this as a sign of a peaceful society built on cooperation. Others warn that the absence of warlike artifacts does not necessarily prove there was never conflict, but it does highlight the possibility that Caral's agricultural success may have been enough to meet basic needs without causing large-scale fighting. Evidence shows that Caral's agricultural and food systems contributed to a supportive cultural framework, one in which people had enough to eat, leaders could organise construction projects and ceremonies, and trade networks stretched along the coast. For a civilization that dates back roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years, this level of societal development is extraordinary. It points to an innovative community that used local resources, from the river to the sea, to support itself and, in the process, left behind one of the earliest urban settlements in the Americas. Agriculture and food systems are never just about producing calories. They reflect social values, technological skills, trade relationships, and the ways people interact with their environment. Caral stands as an example of how an ancient society can thrive with careful management of resources, communal teamwork, and a balanced reliance on different ecosystems. While much about Caral remains mysterious, the evidence of its farming methods and its ability to make good use of both land and sea resources tells a tale of creativity and strength. This civilization's approach to feeding its population likely played a key role in ensuring its position as one of the most remarkable early urban centers in the Americas, and it invites ongoing research into how exactly Caral's people managed to support themselves for so many centuries. Caral's legacy is often remembered for its pyramids and ceremonial plazas, but beneath these large structures is an equally interesting story about tools and technology. Researchers have tried to understand what kinds of tools the Caral people used to shape their surroundings, build big buildings, and do everyday tasks. Since Caral did not have the advanced metal tools found in later civilizations, focus naturally turns to the stone, wood, bone, and possibly shell tools that helped people achieve important work in farming and building. The tools of Caral might not look impressive by today's standards, but they show clever use of the materials available. One noticeable point is how Caral, even though it existed around the same time as early civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt, does not seem to have developed widespread metalworking. Bronze or iron tools are rarely found in the Soup Valley. Instead, people used simpler materials. Stones were shaped into cutting edges, scrapers, and possibly points for hunting. Wood could be used as handles for these stone tools or made into digging sticks and levers. Even though these tools seem basic, skilled workers could make items sharp and strong enough to handle farming, carving, and building. The success of Caral's irrigation systems and big buildings shows that these tools were enough for large projects. Stone tools were probably made from local resources. By looking at quarries or natural rock deposits near the Soup Valley, researchers can guess where people got their materials. Making the tools involved chipping or grinding stones to create usable edges. This process needed special knowledge, because not all stones react the same way to pressure. The fact that Caral built such large pyramids and plazas suggests that a group of skilled workers made and cared for the tools. These workers may have been valued for their skills, and over time they likely improved their methods to work faster and better. While stone tools were important, other materials were also key. Textiles were an important type of technology, especially cotton. In Caral, cotton was used for fishing nets, bags, and possibly clothing. Making these items required careful spinning of fibres, then weaving them into nets or cloth. The frames or looms for weaving were likely made of wood, and the process needed both time and skill. Fishing nets, for example, had to be strong enough to last through repeated use in the ocean. Being able to make many nets shows that there was an organised textile work system, beyond simple household tasks, especially since extra cotton could be traded with nearby communities. The idea of quipu often comes up when talking about Andean civilizations, though it is more famous with the Inca, who came long after Caral. It is not clear if Caral used quipu or another string-based recording system. However, the advanced knowledge of textiles leaves open the chance that some kind of chord-based system existed. This system would be an impressive technology, allowing people to keep or share information without writing on clay or paper. Scholars debate if quipu started in earlier Andean cultures, including Caral, but proof has not been found. Still, the topic shows how important textile skills were to the region's technology. When building their large structures, the people of Caral used shikra bags. Shikra means woven bags, likely made of plant fibres or cotton, filled with stones and used as a kind of building block for platform mounds and pyramids. By stacking these bags, workers could make stable layers. This method reduced the need for mortar and allowed faster building. Observers note that the Caral pyramids include many layers of shikra-filled bags, showing that construction was carefully planned and organised over long periods. This method also handled earthquake shocks fairly well, which was useful in a quake-prone region. Besides building, Caral's people needed tools for daily life. Fishing needed spears or hooks, and while metal hooks were likely missing, bone or shell hooks could work. In the fields, farmers used digging sticks or simple hoes made from wood or stone to prepare the soil. After harvesting, grinding stones or mortars could be used to process seeds and grains into flour or paste. Without modern machines, people relied on these simple tools, which they made and cared for themselves or got from local specialists who were skilled in making them. Another interesting part of Caral's technology is its approach to architecture, especially the layout and design of shared spaces. The arrangement of plazas and placement of buildings shows an understanding of geometry and possibly astronomy. Researchers have noticed that some pyramids line up with geographic or astronomical points, though the exact meaning is debated. If these alignments were on purpose, it suggests that Caral's leaders or builders knew about celestial cycles. Watching the sun, moon, and stars might have helped decide when to plant and harvest crops, or when to hold important religious events. This type of technology, though less tangible than stone or bone tools, could be just as important in daily and spiritual life. Since Caral has few images or written records, it is hard to know all of their technology. Still, archaeologists can learn from artifacts like bone needles, weaving tools, or fishing equipment. These items might seem simple, but they show the everyday innovation that supported Caral's economy and culture. When needles were used to sew cloth or repair a net, it was a small but important act that helped the community. Without these tools, Caral could not feed or clothe its people, or support the labour needed for building pyramids. Caral's technology also included making musical instruments. Several reed flutes and wind instruments have been found at the site, showing that people could make precise holes in reeds or bones to play music. Making a playable instrument needed a good sense of sound and pitch, which is another form of technology, though used for cultural or religious activities. Being able to make flutes that play correct notes shows a mix of art and skill. Though these instruments are cultural, they show the community's overall cleverness. The shared aspect of technology was important. Large building projects needed not just skilled toolmakers, but also organised workers, planning, and leadership. Moving heavy stones or shikra bags over distances required teamwork. Tools like rollers, sleds, or simple levers might have been used to move materials. Even without wheels or draft animals, Caral completed massive works that have lasted thousands of years. This shows their collective technical skill. Although Caral existed long before modern machines, it is important to remember that technology is not just about electronics or metals. Every part of daily life, from weaving nets to building pyramids, used tools suited to the environment. Shells could be used as scoops or scrapers. Feathers might be used in costumes or decoration. Technology, art, and religion were likely connected in Caral, each helping the community survive and thrive. In farming, technology also included irrigation. Simple canals, gates, and water channels were engineering achievements that allowed people to live in the desert. Controlling water flow required understanding slope, water pressure, and soil absorption. This knowledge was not written in books but passed down through learning by doing and working together. Over generations, people improved these systems to grow more crops. This group engineering is as much a proof of Caral's skill as their pyramids. It is also possible that Caral used measurement systems to plan buildings. Repeating sizes in mounds and plazas suggests that builders used standard units of length or volume, even if we don't know exactly what they were. Ropes or marked cords could have been simple measuring tools. Accurate measurement is needed for large structures to be stable and line up properly. This shows that technology is not only physical tools but also ideas like measuring systems. Caral's decline is debated, but some think changing environmental conditions may have hurt farming or trade. Technology can only help so much if the environment changes too fast or outside pressures increase. Still, the tools and techniques of Caral left a lasting mark, influencing later Andean cultures. Memory of shikra building, weaving, and teamwork likely helped more advanced societies that came after Caral. Today, Caral's technology gives us a view into a past where cleverness mattered. People had to work with what was around: stone, wood, fibre, water, and land to live sustainably. Lessons can be learned about using resources well, working together, and living with nature. Caral raises questions about what progress means. Lack of metal tools did not stop people from building big pyramids, trading widely, and creating a culture. Caral's technology was flexible. One fibre could be used for a net, tying shikra bags, or making an instrument. A bone could be a hook or a needle. The environment shaped the materials, and people responded with smart multi-use solutions. These examples show practical thinking, problem-solving, and willingness to invest community time in work that helped everyone. Much is still buried in the Soup Valley, and future digs or research might reveal more about Caral's tools. New methods like residue analysis, examining tiny wear marks, or better dating techniques could show how tools were used and by whom. Until then, the tools found show a community that used simple materials very skillfully. Caral proves that building big structures does not require metal tools. With organisation, creativity, and shared effort, people can achieve great things, even with what we might now call basic tools. Caral is often called one of the earliest cities in the Americas, and its society thrived thousands of years ago. Researchers have wondered how its people might have shared ideas, communicated, and recorded information. There is particular interest in whether they developed any kind of writing or used other ways to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. When people talk about ancient civilizations, writing is often seen as a sign of complexity and social development. In places like Mesopotamia, a type of cuneiform script helped archaeologists track trade, religious rituals, and historical events. In ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs told stories of pharaohs, gods, and daily life along the Nile. Compared to these, Caral does not have a fully understood writing system or direct written records, which makes it puzzling in studies of how complex societies form and operate. The lack of a known writing system should not be seen as a sign of a less advanced civilization. In Caral, researchers see evidence of impressive building projects, large pyramids, careful city planning, and possible use of symbolic communication. This shows a society with a high level of organisation. The question is how such organisation was kept and passed on without obvious written symbols like cuneiform or hieroglyphs. Scholars have debated whether the people of Caral relied on spoken stories to preserve knowledge, laws, stories, and religious beliefs. Oral traditions can be very good at memorising and repeating important information. They can keep stories consistent over generations, especially when religious and ceremonial activities bring the community together around shared beliefs and practices. Another interesting idea is that Caral may have used an early type of quipu, a system of knotted cords later used by the Inca. In Inca culture, quipu cords recorded numbers for taxes, tribute, population counts, and sometimes family records. The question is whether this system started earlier in Peruvian cultures like Caral. Some archaeologists think certain artifacts from Caral could be early forms of quipu, or quipu-like tools, used to record important numbers or keep track of goods. This suggests that while Caral might not have had a formal writing system with pictures or letters, They could have used a more abstract way of keeping records through knots and threads. Another point of interest is the possibility of symbolic designs on walls, textiles, or pottery. Although Caral does not show many painted pots or carved stones like some Mesoamerican sites, scholars wonder if they used more short-lived materials for symbols. Making cloth was clearly important in ancient Peru, and Caral might have had advanced weaving with hidden messages in the patterns. The lack of surviving textiles with clear writing may be due to decay over time, especially if they were not buried in ways that preserved them. If Caral's people wove specific patterns and symbols into cloth, it may have acted as a visual language showing identity, social rank, or religious ideas. Communication also includes ways beyond writing. Buildings can act as a form of communication, especially when monuments and ceremonial areas show social ranks and ideas about the universe. Caral's pyramids and plazas may have been a community statement, a physical form of shared beliefs about divine forces or cosmic order. The design of public spaces can guide how people interact, suggesting how Caral's residents might have shown political power, religious devotion, and community identity without words. For example, the careful placement of plazas, round terraces, and pyramids might have been a language of space that everyone understood. Public gatherings and festivals were another way to communicate. Formal events in the main plaza, possibly with music or processions, allowed leaders to make announcements or show power. If someone important needed to share a law or news, the central square of Caral would be the best place. Even without carving these announcements in stone, the memory of public speeches could survive in oral tradition for generations. Such gatherings probably strengthened social unity because people could watch leadership in action, raise concerns, and form alliances. Caral's lack of known warfare also suggests their communication focused on negotiation, cooperation, and community building rather than military organization. Scholars note the absence of walls and weapons, meaning they likely did not focus on violent conquest. This does not mean there was no conflict, but it suggests a different way of solving problems. Communication could have happened in community councils or spiritual ceremonies where tensions were addressed in ritual. Such cooperative systems would need well-structured communication, even without writing. Trade is another area tied to communication. Caral seems to have been part of a bigger network of coastal communities, shown by seafood remains and materials not native to the Soup Valley. Trade depends on trust and understanding. People would need to agree on the value of goods, plan delivery, while others will argue some form of record-keeping existed, just not recognized today. Music, gatherings, and rituals may have been more important than written records. Caral might have had a system focused on numbers or inventory, which is not like a story-based script but still counts as a form of writing. The line between spoken culture, symbolic systems, and full writing can be unclear. Today, people think of writing as letters or pictures on clay or stone. But in Caral, writing and communication could include knot systems or repeated ceremonial chants. Their culture focused differently from regions that left thousands of clay tablets or carved stones. This does not make Caral less important. It broadens how humans have shared and stored knowledge. Without a formal script or many pictures, Caral relied on social rituals, communal buildings, and maybe a number-based knot system later seen in Andean cultures. Voices, minds, and buildings were the main ways to communicate. This is hard to interpret today because we usually learn about ancient people from written records. Caral's story is more than finding writing. It is about how a society organized and communicated successfully without leaving many written records. One of the most fascinating parts of Caral's archaeological record is the discovery of musical instruments, especially flutes made from bird bones, as well as other sound-making objects that show the role of music in this ancient society. The presence of these instruments suggests that music, chanting, and other forms of sound expression were an important part of Caral's cultural and religious life. When researchers picture the city at its peak, it is easy to imagine musicians playing during ceremonies or festive events. The echo of these sounds might have filled the plazas, bouncing off the walls of the pyramids and community buildings. These flutes, often made from the bones of birds like pelicans or condors, are not just tools but also works of art. Each flute might have carvings or designs that reflect the tastes of Caral's people. The choice of bird bones is also meaningful, as it could be connected to religious or symbolic beliefs about these animals. Birds, especially large ones, often symbolize a link between the earth and the sky. so making instruments from their bones might have spiritual meaning. The shape and range of these instruments suggest that Caral had a detailed musical scale or collection of songs used in different rituals and community events. Along with flutes, some archaeologists have found cornets or trumpets made of similar materials. These may have made deeper sounds that blended with the higher notes of flutes to create a layered musical effect. The importance of these instruments becomes clear when imagining large gatherings in the city's circular plazas or near the stepped pyramids. Different instruments could have been played during religious ceremonies, processions, or dances. Music has long been a way to bring people together. It can stir emotions, mark the passage of time, and strengthen shared beliefs. In Caral's case, music likely helped connect members of the society under a shared culture. No written music has been found, so the exact tunes that once filled Caral are left to the imagination. However, researchers can learn from the instruments themselves. By testing replicas of these ancient flutes, archaeologists and musicians can figure out the possible notes and ranges that might have been played. These experiments have shown haunting sounds that create a sense of mystery and respect. Some suggest that the music had ritual importance, possibly used to call on gods or mark events like harvests or solstices. The design of Caral's buildings could have enhanced these performances, as open plazas and stone structures would reflect and amplify sounds in unique ways. Music in many ancient cultures is closely linked to religious or spiritual practices. Priests or shamans may have led musical groups to accompany sacred rituals. The rhythms and melodies, along with chanting, would bring participants into altered states of awareness or shared emotional experiences. Drums or other percussion instruments might also have existed, though organic materials decay over thousands of years, leaving less evidence. Even if few percussion objects have been found, it is reasonable to think that drumming or rhythmic clapping happened in Caral to keep time and unify large groups. Music may also have been used to mark life stages. From birth ceremonies to coming-of-age events and funerals, music can guide people through important changes. Caral might have had special songs for different events, passed down orally. These would have become part of the culture, with tunes and words that lasted across generations. Repeating familiar songs could help keep communities together, reminding everyone of their shared past and hopes for the future. Music can stay in memory, making it a powerful way to pass on history, stories, or morals. The community side of music may have helped strengthen social ties in a society that, according to evidence, did not focus on war. Without a military focus, Caral may have put more energy into group rituals. Some researchers even suggest that the reason for so many musical finds is that Caral's people celebrated harmony and community through frequent gatherings. These events may have included group singing or chanting, accompanied by bone flutes, further binding people together in shared sound experiences. Music could also have helped with diplomacy or relationships with nearby regions. If Caral had trading partners along the coast or in nearby valleys, musical performances may have been a way to welcome visitors and create a friendly atmosphere for trade. Sharing instruments or teaching songs could act as a kind of cultural diplomacy, encouraging alliances and understanding. The social power of music is well known in many societies, and it makes sense that Caral used it in similar ways. Though direct proof is limited, it is a likely possibility based on the finds. The style of music may have been influenced by the natural surroundings. The wind in the Soup Valley, the calls of local birds, and the flowing river could have inspired the patterns or rhythms that Caral's musicians used. The shape of the flutes, along with the skill of the makers, would affect how the instruments sounded. Repeating certain notes might reflect natural sounds, linking Caral's spiritual beliefs to the landscape. In many ancient societies, music is a bridge between people and nature, used to show thanks, ask gods for rain, or celebrate harvests. Researchers hope to do more studies on sound in Caral, examining how sound moves through plazas and buildings. By placing modern instruments where the ancient ones were likely played, it is possible to hear echoes of Caral's acoustic past. This research can help show if certain buildings were designed for sound. For example, resonant chambers or staircases may suggest that architects thought about how music would carry during ceremonies. This shows that architecture can do more than provide space. It can create an environment where sound, light, and community events all interact. Music's emotional impact may also be connected to healing or therapy. Some ancient societies used music in medical or spiritual healing rituals, believing certain tunes could drive away illness or bad energy. If Caral's priests included healers, they may have used flutes, and chanting to calm patients or ask for the help of gods. There is no direct proof, but other ancient Andean cultures suggest this possibility. Music can calm the mind, coordinate group movements, and create a sense of unity. These qualities would be valuable in a society seeking balance and well-being. Modern Peruvian culture still has strong musical traditions from indigenous and mixed heritages, using flutes, panpipes, and other wind instruments passed down for centuries. While it is not certain that these traditions come directly from Caral, there is a deep cultural continuity in the Andes that keeps some instruments and musical styles alive. The discovery of Caral's flutes has sparked interest among musicians and historians who want to connect the past with modern music, exploring whether echoes of Caral's music survive in some form, even if changed over time. Music in Caral goes beyond just ceremonies or social events. It can give insight into the minds and feelings of these ancient people. Making instruments from bird bones, tuning them, and playing together shows a sense of beauty and a desire for shared experience. That desire, seen in many human communities, links the present and the distant past. Caral's instruments are reminders of a shared heartbeat that once lived in the Super Valley. Their existence shows that writing is not the only way a society can leave a cultural mark. Caral demonstrates that music can carry a rich cultural legacy, heard through its echoes. Much is still unknown about Caral's music. Ongoing digs might find more instruments or clues about how music was made, where it was played, and who played it. There could be evidence that some buildings amplified sound for rituals. There may even be objects showing people playing instruments, though none have been found yet. Each new discovery helps create a fuller picture of Caral's cultural life. Environmental adaptation played an important role in Caral's growth and long-term success. The Supe Valley, located on the dry coast of what is now Peru, was the setting for one of the world's oldest cities. Caral's environment was tough, with little rainfall and reliance on rivers coming down from the Andes. Despite these hard conditions, Caral thrived for centuries, showing a smart understanding of how to use the resources available. Researchers studying Caral have been impressed by the people's ability to build a successful civilization in a place where managing water, changing climate, and the unpredictable coastal ecosystem were daily challenges. The city's closeness to the Super River was a big advantage for Caral's people. The river's seasonal flow gave water for irrigation, making farming possible. This was essential for growing cotton and other crops that supported local life and trade. Using the river's water would have needed careful planning. Canals and irrigation channels had to be dug and looked after to make sure crops got enough water without flooding fields or washing away valuable soil. Over time, Caral's people probably developed ways to share water fairly across different areas of the city. These shared projects show a high level of organisation and teamwork. It seems that leaders or a community council organised these efforts, which were important not just for everyday life but for keeping the city stable. Flood control was probably another main concern. The coastal areas of Peru are prone to events like El Niño, which can bring much heavier rains than usual. If not handled properly, these rains could cause damaging floods. There are no written records of how Caral dealt with these events, but some researchers think that careful placement of buildings and building terraces might have helped redirect extra water. Architectural choices, like raised platforms and partly sunken plazas, could have served not only religious purposes but also practical ones, such as guiding or storing water. It is common in early civilizations to mix religious or social buildings with practical design, and Caral seems to fit that pattern. Adapting to the dry climate also needed knowledge of local plants. Cotton is often mentioned as an important crop because Caral's people used it for more than just clothing. Cotton was key for making fishing nets, which were then used to catch seafood along the coast. This connection between inland farming and coastal fishing was a clever way to supplement the diet. Cotton fields in the Supe Valley needed irrigation, and once harvested, the fibre could be made into nets. Those nets could be traded to coastal communities or used by Caral's own fishermen if they went toward the ocean. This link between two different environments, dry farmland and the rich Pacific Ocean, shows careful planning. By having different sources of food and trade goods, Caral's people reduced the risk of crop failure. The dryness of the region may have helped preserve the city's buildings, but it also caused daily life challenges. Drinking water had to be secured. Wells or storage tanks may have existed, though clear evidence is limited. People needed steady water not just for crops but also for drinking, cooking and cleaning. Caral's success suggests they found workable solutions, perhaps by channeling the river or storing water in communal reservoirs. This would have needed community cooperation, as water management often creates social rules or agreements. Communities in dry areas usually make rules to share water fairly and use it efficiently. The layout of Caral shows a careful approach to space and resources. The city is built around a central area with large platform mounds, plazas and houses. Many buildings show signs of repeated construction, meaning they were renovated or expanded over time. This constant rebuilding could reflect adapting to environmental changes, population growth, or new cultural needs. For example, a platform mound might have been enlarged to give extra protection from seasonal floods, or to meet new ceremonial needs. The building materials, mostly stone and earth, came from nearby areas. Labour-heavy projects like these were not done randomly. They required careful planning and knowledge of local materials. Workers needed to find the right stones and soil, bring them to the site and shape them for use. Another part of environmental adaptation is how Caral's people used resources from different ecological areas. The Andean foothills, coastal plains and ocean each offered different products. Through trade or direct trips, they could get fish, seaweed and salt from the coast, while trading cotton, dried crops, or other inland goods. Evidence suggests that Caral was part of a larger network with other Norte Chico sites along the coast and nearby valleys. These connections helped them handle local resource shortages. If there was a temporary lack of fish, for example, they could trade cotton for preserved fish from another site. This trading system was as important as local farming because it reduced the risk of famine caused by changes in one area. Besides managing resources, the people of Caral had to adapt to possible earthquakes. Peru is in a tectonically active region, and ancient civilizations there likely face periodic tremors. The platform mounds at Caral show building methods like using shikra bags, woven bags filled with stones, that likely helped absorb shocks. Shikra bag technology may have added strength to buildings by giving them some flexibility during quakes. Layering these shikra-filled bags spread the seismic forces, making buildings more stable during earthquakes. This choice of building material shows practical knowledge of the environment, as generations of builders learned what worked best through trial and error. Over time, this knowledge became part of Caral's building traditions. Wind can also be a problem in desert regions, causing erosion and moving sand. Caral's buildings may have been positioned to account for wind patterns. Walls or mounds could act as windbreaks, protecting living areas from strong gusts. Extended families may have built homes together, creating small neighbourhoods that shielded each other from dust or sandstorms. Archaeologists often note that the layout of ancient cities aligns with cardinal points or celestial events, but in Caral, practical factors like wind direction were important. The Soup Valley's environment probably changed over centuries. River flows could shift, and climate changes like long droughts or wet periods would test Caral's strategies. If the water table dropped, people would need to build deeper canals or rely more on trade for certain goods. If floods became more frequent, they would have to reinforce embankments and plan safe storage for harvests. Balancing dryness and excess water is common in civilizations that depend on a single water source in an otherwise dry region. Farming in Caral was likely done in small plots near the city and larger fields farther away. Crops may have included squash, beans, and possibly chili peppers. Residents had to know the best times to plant, how to keep soil fertile, and how to rotate crops if that was practiced. Crop rotation helps keep soil healthy and control pests. There is no direct evidence that Caral used crop rotation, but many early farming societies developed simple soil management techniques through observation over generations. The same goes for dealing with pests or crop diseases. Without chemical pesticides, they had to rely on natural methods, like planting certain crops together to repel insects or rotating fields to break pest cycles. Trade was not limited to food. Caral may have exchanged materials like obsidian, shells, or precious stones for decoration or ceremonial use. These materials came from different ecological areas, showing how well connected Caral was despite being in a desert-like environment. Adapting to their surroundings also included social strategies. People formed alliances, kept trade networks, and may have held festivals or gatherings that strengthened these ties. Shared rituals and celebrations help maintain community unity, which supports adaptation by pooling resources or sharing knowledge about upcoming climate challenges. One thing that sets Caral apart from some other ancient cities is the lack of fortifications and weapons among archaeological finds. This suggests Caral's strategy relied on cooperation rather than fighting over scarce resources. Instead of building walls to protect fields from raiders, Caral's people may have made partnerships with neighbouring groups. This could create a stable environment for trade and cultural exchange, strengthening their ability to handle environmental pressures. Without constant war, people could focus on improving irrigation, farming techniques, and expanding trade routes. Music and ceremonial life may also have helped Caral adapt. Large gatherings could match planting or harvesting seasons or important cosmic events. Rituals could mark agricultural cycles and build unity among citizens. This cultural unity would be important when many people needed to work together on canals or rebuild structures after floods or earthquakes. If shared beliefs linked environmental stability to ceremonies, people might take part willingly in community projects, leading to an environment managed through teamwork. Over time, Caral eventually declined, possibly due to changing environmental conditions. Some theories suggest shifts in climate or changes in the river flow made large-scale farming harder. If the river moved or silt built up in canals, keeping infrastructure could become too costly. Population growth may have strained resources, leading people to move away. Even the best adaptations can eventually fail when environmental stresses change over generations. Yet, during its peak, Caral showed a remarkable ability to live in a dry landscape, using river water, coastal trade, and community work to thrive. When experts study Caral, they often focus on the impressive pyramids and plazas. But behind these monuments is a detailed story of how people learned to manage a fragile environment. Irrigation, crop choices, trade networks, and building methods combined to create a stable society that lasted centuries without major conflict. This achievement shows that success in an ancient civilization is not just about big monuments. It also involves finding ways to feed people, protect them from harsh climate, and maintain unity. Caral's resilience in a tough environment offers valuable lessons on how humans have survived and sometimes thrived in places that at first seem unwelcoming. Caral's pyramids are among the most noticeable features of this ancient city in the Supe Valley of Peru. Researchers have long marvelled at the architectural skill on display, especially given the very old age of the site. Traditional teaching once placed the earliest large structures in regions like Mesopotamia and Egypt, but the discovery of large platform mounds in Caral challenged that belief. Even without advanced metal tools, animal labour, or complex wheel-based transportation, the builders of Caral constructed huge pyramids that rose from the desert landscape. These structures, which are sometimes referred to as platform mounds or stepped pyramids, suggest a level of city planning and resource management that was unexpected for a civilization that grew before many other well-known ancient societies. Over time, excavations have revealed broad staircases, terraces, and plazas connected to these striking buildings, offering an interesting look into how people in the Supe Valley organized their social and ceremonial lives. The very existence of these pyramids implies that Caral's people had special knowledge in construction, as well as a shared idea of how their city should look. Researchers have spent years trying to understand how such large projects could be organized without the kinds of administrative tools known from later civilizations. Despite that mystery, the pyramids remain a powerful sign of the cleverness and cooperative spirit of Caral's people. The first detailed modern explorations of Caral's pyramids took place in the later part of the 20th century. Archaeologists were amazed by the sheer size and the careful arrangement of these structures, some of which spread across large areas. Many of the pyramids are actually complexes that seem to have served as public or ceremonial spaces. Some show a series of platforms that rise in steps, each level possibly used for specific purposes, like storage, rituals, or social gatherings. The pyramids also feature broad ramps or staircases leading up from the plaza level, which would have allowed people to reach different terraces or ceremonial rooms. The presence of fire altars or ritual spaces near the tops of these pyramids has led experts to think that religious activities played a major role in these raised platforms. In many cases, the detail of the interior rooms and the artifacts found within them suggest that Caral's priests or important members of society may have used these upper levels for special gatherings. The effort needed to build these architectural wonders was huge, likely stretching over many generations. Planning had to start with gathering raw materials, including stones from riverbeds and other sources in the surrounding area. These stones were then arranged to form the pyramid's core, after which mud and other materials were used to shape and strengthen the structure. Although these steps might sound simple, the the actual process demanded large amounts of labour and careful coordination among the builders. Studies focusing on the pyramid's design have highlighted unique features that set Caral apart from other ancient city-states around the world. For example, researchers have noted a clear focus on symmetry in some of the platform layouts, as though the people of Caral valued geometric balance as part of their building style. The alignment of certain pyramids with nearby plazas and pathways could mean that Caral's planners imagined specific lines of sight or symbolic connections between spaces. Some specialists even suspect that astronomical alignments played a role in the pyramid's design, although this idea is still debated. Still, the architecture strongly suggests a society capable of large public works, with clearly defined roles for workers, supervisors, and planners. The attention to detail extends to holding walls, drainage systems, and decorative elements that might seem fancy for a population so far back in time. Even so, the overall look gives a sense of practicality and shared usefulness, especially given the likely ceremonies and gatherings that took place on these stepped terraces. The materials used in the pyramids show an adaptable approach to the local environment. The Soup Valley is a desert region, but it also benefits from river systems that supported farming and fishing. Stones for construction were available in the nearby riverbeds, and dried mud served as a binding agent. This mix of stone and mud is not entirely unique to Caral, but the sheer size of the building projects is what sets these pyramids apart from simpler settlement patterns in other parts of the world. Some surfaces might have been plastered or whitewashed for ceremonial or visual reasons, though much of that detail has worn away over time. Researchers suspect that care of these structures was likely an ongoing process, with many generations responsible for upkeep, repairs, and expansions. Because the pyramids appear in clear clusters around the city, it is possible that different groups or family-based communities within Caral took responsibility for one pyramid or complex. Over time, each group may have developed unique building styles or changes to reflect shifting social or religious needs. The construction methods behind the pyramids have sparked considerable discussion among experts. One of the most talked about aspects is the use of shikras, which are woven bags made from plant fibers. These bags were filled with stones and used in the pyramid's interior. This method helped create a steady core while also making the building process easier. Workers could carry stones in these shikras from the riverbed to the building site, drop them, and go back for more. Although it may seem basic compared to modern methods, this idea was effective for large building projects. The even weight of these stone bags likely helped ensure a balanced distribution of mass within the pyramid, reducing the risk of collapse. The shikras themselves sometimes contain decorative designs, showing that they were not just simple tools but also items of cultural meaning. By studying these woven bags, researchers can learn about Caral's textile technology, including the kind of fibers used and the weaving methods practiced. The pyramid's place within Caral's social system is another subject of debate. Some researchers believe these structures mainly served ceremonial or religious purposes, given that altars, fire pits, and possibly ritual spaces are present at the upper levels. Others suggest that the pyramids might also have worked as a kind of social or political stage, where leaders could address gatherings from a symbolic high point. The large plazas next to these platforms support the idea that people gathered in large numbers, possibly for festivals, community announcements, or trade events. Although the lack of written records makes it hard to say exactly what they were used for, the lasting presence of these huge buildings suggests that they were central to Caral's shared identity. They may have shown prosperity, stability, and the unifying power of a shared cultural project. For Caral's people, the pyramids could have been solid proof that their civilization was organized, resourceful, and supported by whatever gods or spiritual forces they believed in at the time. When comparing Caral's pyramids to those of Egypt or Mesopotamia, a few clear differences appear. Egyptian pyramids often served as tombs for pharaohs, containing elaborate burial rooms deep within. Caral's pyramids, however, do not seem to have been used as tombs, maybe a closer match, yet Caral's structures do not fully fit those either. The difference in materials is also striking, as Egyptian monuments used huge limestone blocks, while Caral's builders relied on locally found stones and mud mortar, along with the shikra method. Despite these differences, Caral's pyramids show that large, impressive architecture developed independently in many regions, proving humanity's shared drive to build grand structures that stand as cultural landmarks. Each site adapted building methods to local conditions and resources, creating a mix of ancient architectural wonders. Discussions around the dating of Caral's pyramids highlight the ongoing challenges archaeologists face. Carbon dating of materials, such as reed fibers and other organic remains, has placed the city's growth as early as the late 4th millennium BCE. That timing places Caral on a fascinating parallel with the early periods in Egypt and the city-states of Sumer, leading many to call Caral one of the oldest urban centres in the Americas. More recent data suggests that some of the pyramids may have been built over centuries, growing in steps as the population or city leaders felt the need to expand. This process shows a level of continuity that points to political stability and cultural unity. People did not abandon Caral while building these pyramids, showing that the city was thriving during that time. The sameness of some design elements might point to cultural traditions passed down through families or groups of builders who improved their craft from one generation to the next. Environmental factors also matter when looking at the state of Caral's pyramids today. The Soup Valley's dry climate helps preserve ancient structures, so researchers can still observe details that would have disappeared long ago in wetter regions. Even so, erosion and natural forces have damaged some parts, often exposing the pyramid's cores or washing away certain layers. Archaeologists have to stabilize these monuments while also studying them, a task that requires advanced conservation methods. Efforts to protect Caral's pyramids also require teamwork with local communities to ensure that tourism and other modern activities do not accidentally harm the site. The pyramids themselves face the risk of damage if visitor numbers grow without proper management. Protective steps are crucial if this ancient legacy is to remain open for future generations of researchers and casual visitors alike. Some of the most interesting finds around the pyramids have been musical instruments, including flutes and horns made from animal bones. These artifacts show the cultural setting in which people used the pyramids. Music, ceremonies, and group gatherings likely happened in the plazas and on the upper platforms of these structures. The presence of these instruments near the pyramids suggests that the buildings were centres not just for serious rituals, but also for celebrations or group events that might have included processions, dancing, or feasting. The exact nature of these gatherings remains unknown, but the architectural design, with wide stairways and open terraces, strongly suggests that large groups of people were able to gather in and around the pyramids. These structures likely served as stages for cultural expression, strengthening the idea that they were central to the social life of Caral. Health and medicine in Caral are interesting topics, especially considering the small amount of evidence that has survived thousands of years. Archaeologists have put together clues from bones, tools, and the overall way of life in the Soup Valley. Caral thrived during a time before many other known civilizations in the Americas, and it did so under what seemed to be unique social conditions. There is no clear record of written language found at Caral, so much of what is known about health and medicine comes from the physical remains of the people, and any tools or places that might be related to healing. Researchers have noticed that, compared to some other ancient sites, the people of Caral may not have shown as many signs of violent conflict or widespread disease, though there are certain patterns that come from a life based on farming and fishing. Clues about common illnesses come from understanding daily life. Caral's location in the dry Soup Valley suggests a reliance on irrigation farming and trade with nearby coastal communities. Residents ate domesticated plants, fish, and possibly local fruits. Diet has always affected health, and one idea is that the people of Caral got a fairly balanced mix of carbohydrates and proteins. Cotton was grown in large amounts, but that was not for food. It was used for clothes, fishing nets, and other useful items. Other crops may have included beans, squash, and possibly corn later on, though there is debate on whether corn was common in the region during Caral's peak. Beans, squash, and other vegetables could have provided protein and important nutrients. Because of the nearby coast, fish probably formed a main protein source, which might have prevented some nutritional problems that appear in societies far from the sea. When archaeologists study bones, they look for signs of malnutrition, disease, or injury. Signs of malnutrition can show up as marks on bones or in tooth enamel. Evidence of repeated stress might show how hard physical work was. There is some evidence that men and women both did tough physical tasks, but the bones do not always show a big difference in labour roles. People in Caral may have had times of plenty and times of stress caused by changes in the environment, like shifts in the nearby river. While there is no clear proof of large epidemics, it is possible that waterborne illnesses or minor diseases were part of daily life, as they were in other ancient populations. With little evidence of warfare, shown by the lack of strong defences or many weapons, major injuries from violence may have been rare. This does not mean accidents never happened, but it suggests that violent conflict was not a constant threat. This could mean that it helps preserve organic material, which is one reason Caral has taught us so much about ancient Andean societies. Examining teeth can show the types of food eaten and whether people had common dental problems. Some early societies show few cavities, possibly due to diets not high in sugar. Archaeologists have also looked for signs of birth defects or inherited conditions in bones. The small number of bones from Caral means the data might not represent the whole population. Still, some families or groups may have inherited conditions. Care for sick people likely relied on herbal remedies and spiritual practices. Families probably provided most care, sometimes with help from someone seen as having special healing skills. Living in close communities and strong family ties could have influenced how medicine was practiced. The topic of childbirth and mother's health is another area of interest. Ancient societies usually had high death rates for mothers and babies. Caral's people might have had social habits or beliefs around childbirth that included rituals, midwives, or help from the community. There are no direct records of midwives at Caral, but many ancient societies had some kind of female-led birth support, often passed down from one generation to the next. It was likely normal for women to use knowledge of herbal pain relief, positions for labour, and care after giving birth. If Caral's social system was as organised as its buildings suggest, there might have been caregivers or special spaces in homes where births happened under careful watch. After childbirth, new mothers often needed rest and good food. The community may have had traditions to make sure new mothers got enough help. Without writing, all ideas come from archaeological evidence and comparisons to other civilizations in the Andes. Those comparisons show close family groups that handled major life events together. Rituals may have been used to mark important moments in health, like welcoming a new child or saying goodbye to someone who died. Burial practices at Caral might also show how people thought about the dead, but the area has not produced the large tombs that some other ancient cultures left behind. The remains that are found are often inside the living area, showing that life and death happened in the same shared space. Like many civilizations, Caral did not last forever. It went through a decline and was eventually abandoned, leaving the city and its culture quiet for thousands of years. Understanding why Caral declined means looking at the limited archaeological clues, studying environmental data, and trying to piece together what might have happened as centuries of prosperity gave way to a less stable life. Because Caral left no written records, any story of its downfall is necessarily incomplete and could change as new evidence appears. Still, historians and archaeologists have built a believable story of how changes in the environment, trade patterns, society, or a mix of factors could have caused the fall of this once thriving civilization. One popular theory focuses on environmental changes, especially those connected to water. In areas like the central coast of Peru, changes in temperature and ocean currents can bring long droughts or heavy floods, similar to what is now called El Niño. If Caral faced several years of less water, the fields that once fed large populations could have dried out, hurting the city's farming. Even a well-organised society might struggle to cope if the climate changed suddenly or for a long time, especially without advanced irrigation systems to protect against drought. Over time, if harvests failed and famine loomed, people may have left the busy pyramids and plazas to find areas with reliable water. Another environmental factor sometimes mentioned in Caral's decline is earthquakes. The Andean region is tectonically active, and though direct proof of huge earthquakes hitting Caral is hard to find, the risk was always there. A strong earthquake could collapse buildings or redirect water, causing major problems. Even though Caral's structures were strong and built with shikra bags, woven bags filled with stones, they could still be damaged by earthquakes. Even small damage over time could make living conditions worse or push people to leave. Some archaeologists suggest that earthquake damage may have been one of several factors in Caral's decline, though it was rarely the only reason. Still, earthquakes were part of the bigger environmental risks faced by early Andean societies. Another major explanation for Caral's fall is economic and social change. Caral grew partly because it was a regional hub that managed farming, fishing and trade. Cotton and other goods were traded with nearby coastal communities, boosting both the economy and culture. Over time, trade may have shifted to other centres, leaving Caral at a disadvantage. Maybe new trade routes bypassed the Soup Valley, or rival settlements offered better trade deals. If Caral lost its economic power, it would struggle to pay for big building projects and maintain the social unity that had supported it. People often move toward prosperity, so a shrinking economy could have led them to leave for better opportunities. Social divisions or internal conflicts may have also grown, though Caral shows little evidence of war or major violence. Still, a society under stress, whether from environmental pressures or declining trade, might face power struggles among elites or competition for scarce resources. Archaeologists have noted that Caral's buildings suggest a united and fairly peaceful social system, but no society is free from tension. If certain families or groups had more control over land or trade, they may have tried to take even more power, creating internal disputes. Even without obvious conflict, uneven wealth or access to resources can weaken the social bonds that keep people invested in city life. As living conditions got worse or inequality increased, trust in leaders might fade, prompting people to move away. A third idea involves disease or epidemics, though solid evidence for this in Caral is limited. Ancient populations were vulnerable to sickness, and an epidemic could wipe out workers, disrupt farming, and weaken social structures. People have always lived alongside diseases, and an outbreak in a close-knit community could be devastating. Without detailed written or visual records, the presence of disease can only be guessed. Still, it remains a possibility, especially considering how fragile early cities could be when facing health problems. A disease outbreak would be worse if combined with hunger from failing crops or other pressures. Some scholars believe Caral's decline was gradual, as population numbers dropped and people moved to other valleys or nearby highlands. This fits with environmental stress ideas, since slow changes in rainfall or river flow wouldn't cause immediate disaster, but would steadily lower crop yields over decades. Over time, younger generations might move to areas with more opportunities, leaving Caral emptier. Eventually, the momentum that kept building projects and community events going would stop, and the city would feel abandoned. There may not have been a single moment when Caral fell, but rather a long process ending with too few people to maintain the city or its shared religious practices. Despite these plausible explanations, the question of Caral's decline is still open. Archaeologists keep finding new clues in pottery pieces, organic remains, and building evidence. Each new dig could change what is known about how Caral thrived and why it faded. What is fairly clear is that Caral did not end in war or destruction like some other ancient cities. There is no layer of ashes or mass graves that would suggest conquest. The calm archaeological record has both interested and puzzled researchers who try to understand a society that may have largely avoided conflict yet still disappeared. This picture, a peaceful and cooperative city that lasted for centuries, is rare among early civilizations, where stories of conquests and dramatic collapses are more common. The lack of written records means that cultural or religious changes could have sped up Caral's decline. If the city's religious or political leaders lost authority, people might question why they should keep building pyramids or attending big ceremonies. Religious doubt can be triggered by natural disasters, sometimes seen as signs that gods or leaders have lost favour. Younger generations might also have been drawn to new religious movements elsewhere. In trade-linked regions, news of new beliefs could spread quickly. If those beliefs promised better fortune or a more appealing life, migration would follow. Over decades, Caral's pyramids could become more symbolic than practical, until most of the population saw no reason to stay. Another point to consider is that Caral's decline might be linked to the wider fate of the Norte Chico region, which had several sites with similar traits. Some historians suggest that instead of a single collapse, cultural energy simply shifted among neighbouring communities. Caral might have been the main hub for a while, but as environmental or social changes occurred, other cities in Norte Chico could have risen. The civilization as a whole might not have fully collapsed, but instead changed form. Caral's influence may have continued through cultural developments in nearby sites, even as Caral itself became less important. This would mean its architecture and knowledge didn't disappear but moved to other local centres until the entire Norte Chico tradition eventually gave way to other cultures like Chavin. It is also possible to see Caral's decline as part of the natural life cycle of ancient cities. Many archaeological sites show that populations rise and fall with changing economies, political ties, and natural resources. In the Andes, where microclimates can vary from valley to valley, societies sometimes moved in response to small environmental changes. Caral may be an example of a city that grew during favourable conditions and strong regional connections, only to decline when those conditions changed. In this view, there is nothing catastrophic about Caral's decline. It is simply one stage in a long cycle where cities rise and then fade, overtaken by new centres with better economic or geographical advantages. The lack of large walls or weapons at Caral suggests that outside invasion was unlikely to cause its fall. This makes it different from cities that were clearly attacked by neighbours or conquerors. Caral shows no fortifications or weapons stores typical of war-torn cities. Its peaceful nature, supported by archaeological evidence, points more to internal or environmental causes. Climate change, depleted resources, or changing trade routes remain the main explanations. If fishing declined, farmland failed, or key trade items lost value, it is easy to see why residents might leave for better opportunities elsewhere. It is useful to compare Caral's decline to other ancient civilizations with more dramatic collapses. The Mayan collapse in Mesoamerica is often linked to environmental stress, overpopulation, and internal warfare. The Indus Valley civilization in South Asia may have faced drastic river changes, causing major cities to be abandoned. Unlike these cases, Caral's decline shows no single catastrophic event. Its fall was quieter and less violent. The city seems to have gradually lost its vitality, leaving behind pyramids that stayed largely untouched until modern archaeology reached them in the late 20th century. Some archaeologists use Caral's decline to show how early cities were vulnerable to changes in their surroundings. The story can act as a warning for today, showing that even advanced societies can face serious problems when the environment is disturbed. Caral's people clearly knew how to farm in a dry region, using the Soup River and nearby coast to their benefit. Yet no knowledge or method can fully guarantee success if the climate changes too much. Human strength has limits, and Caral's eventual abandonment reminds us that adapting to environmental change is not always simple. While the overall story of Caral is one of great success and cultural achievement, its end highlights the delicate balance between nature and civilization. One often ignored part is the mental side of decline. A city as big as Caral depended on the shared belief that it was worth keeping. The ongoing building, repairs, and ceremonies needed many people to take part. If, over time, trust in Caral's future decreased because of natural disasters, fewer resources, or the appeal of better lands, the effort to maintain the large public buildings may have seemed useless. The social bond that held the community together would weaken. The idea of Caral as the place to live might have faded as families quietly chose to leave. There is rarely a single moment when this happens. Instead, the city slowly empties, with the last few residents eventually giving in to the lure of better land or the hard truth that Caral could no longer support them. Today, some suggest that people from Caral may have moved to other parts of Peru, bringing their cultural knowledge with them, which later appeared in new forms. If that is true, then Caral did not completely vanish, but moved into a legacy phase. The big pyramids and plazas may have become memories over time, but the spirit of building together, the religious traditions, and even musical practices might have travelled with its people. By the time archaeologists found Caral again in the late 20th century, it was an ancient ruin, yet it may have left unseen marks on later Andean civilizations. Understanding Caral's decline is therefore part of understanding how Andean culture as a whole kept reinventing itself over thousands of years. Each new city built on older traditions, sometimes blending them naturally, other times changing them greatly. In the end, the reasons for Caral's decline are still debated, and the archaeological evidence is incomplete enough that many ideas can exist. Changes in the environment, shifts in trade, social changes, and a slow process of leaving the city could all have played a part. What stands out is how peacefully Caral seems to have faded, with little sign of war or sudden destruction. Its pyramids and plazas were left behind like the shell of a once lively culture, waiting thousands of years to be discovered by modern science. Even though Caral's final chapter is unclear, its legacy as a starting point of Andean civilization is clear. It reached impressive heights for its time, showing a level of organization and cultural skill that would influence later societies. Its decline, then, is both a warning about the fragility of civilizations and proof of human creativity and persistence in changing times.